Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The TV murmured softly in the background as I sat up in bed, typing on my laptop. I'd been working all morning and was pleased with the progress I was making. After cracking my knuckles and stretching my arms over my head, I yawned and looked around the room. It had been 2 weeks since my wife, Sarah, and I had moved into our new house, and it was already beginning to feel like home. Staring up at the ceiling, I remembered the ordeal we went through in procuring our new abode. We had searched for months, trying to find a house that was close to her workplace and within our budget, with no luck. After a while, we started to lose hope when we happened to be driving by the house and saw a for sale sign in the front yard. I called the number on the sign and was able to talk to the realtor, but we nearly jumped out of our seats when we heard how much this house was selling for, as it was well below our budget. Sarah and I met with the realtor the next day and toured the property. The house was everything we were looking for, and we both instantly fell in love with it. We were ready to close the deal then and there, but something was bothering me about the realtor. She seemed nervous and suspiciously eager to get the house sold as soon as possible. After some prodding, I was able to get her to reveal why she was acting the way she was. The realtor told us that the previous occupants were a young couple, much like ourselves, and they were found dead in the house a year prior. She said that their deaths were ruled as homicides, but the murderer was never caught. Because of this, she was having a difficult time getting the old house sold. Naturally, my wife and I were a bit hesitant about buying a house after hearing about its dark past, but after some discussion, we came to the conclusion that it would likely be more difficult for us to find a house that didn't harbor a few metaphorical skeletons. Also, the price was way too low for us to walk away from, so we didn't. And a few days later, we were the proud owners of our very first house. As a writer, I was fortunate enough to be able to work from home while my wife was stuck at an office all day. I didn't mind, however, as having the house to myself for a few hours on weekdays was actually kind of nice. Although I found the silence to be a bit eerie at times. It reminded me of when I would stay home sick from school as a child. I lived with my single mother, and she worked during the day, so I always had the house to myself during those times. Being home alone was always bittersweet to me. I enjoyed the freedom of knowing that I could do anything I wanted and nobody could stop me. But on the other hand, being alone in the house made me feel vulnerable. I could never shake the feeling that someone or something might be creeping around the corner, ready to strike when I least expected it. A yawn escaped my mouth, and I decided that I needed some coffee before I continued working. I was just about to get out of bed and head to the kitchen when I heard a knock on the bedroom door. Startled, I froze in place. Sarah wasn't supposed to be home for another 5 hours. She could have possibly come home early, but it wasn't like her to not call or text first to let me know she was coming. Eager to confirm that the person who had knocked was indeed my wife, I asked hesitantly, "Sarah, is that you?" I was answered with silence. My heart was beating fast, and I could feel myself starting to panic when the door slowly began to open. I held my breath as the door creaked slowly, revealing the person standing behind it. Then a huge sigh of relief shot out of my lungs when I saw Sarah standing in the doorway. "Jeez, babe, you scared the shit out of me," I said, beginning to laugh.
I'm sorry, I came home from work early. Would you like me to make you some coffee?
She asked with a smile. "Oh, yeah. I was just about to get up to make some. That'd be great," I said, pleasantly surprised at her accurate assessment of my need.
Okay, I'll go do that.
She said, before turning around and walking down the hallway toward the kitchen. "Thanks, honey. You're the best," I shouted out to her. I laid back on the bed and grabbed the TV remote. After a few minutes of mindlessly surfing the channels, I heard my phone buzzing on the nightstand next to the bed. I picked it up to see that Sarah was calling me. That's odd, I thought. Why didn't she just come to the room to tell me the coffee was ready? "Hey, babe, is the coffee ready?" I asked immediately after answering the phone.
Coffee? What are you talking about? I just called to tell you that I'm on my way home. I decided to come spend my lunch break with my handsome husband in our new house,
she said without a hint of sarcasm. Somehow, the casual tone of her voice made me nervous, though I knew she was joking. I mean, she had to be. She was already home. I had seen her mere minutes earlier. "Haha, very funny. But seriously, is the coffee ready?" I asked with a bit of unease in my voice.
What are you talking about? I'm not at home. Are you okay? You haven't been into the whiskey this early in the day, have you?
"Come on, honey, stop joking. I saw you just a few minutes ago," I said, my annoyance now palpable.
I'm not joking. I don't know who you think you saw, but it definitely wasn't me.
"Are you being serious?"
Yes, of course I am. Do you need proof?
A loud beeping noise blared through the phone that was unmistakably the sound of a car horn.
There, see? I'm in the car.
Suddenly, the loud, piercing sound of a smoke detector startled me, causing me to drop the phone. It sounded like it was coming from the kitchen. Determined to get to the bottom of the impossible situation I was in, I crept carefully toward the bedroom door and made my way slowly down the hallway toward the kitchen. About halfway there, I could smell smoke. Hurrying my pace, I reached the opening of the kitchen and was met with a horrifying sight. The kitchen was on fire, and standing in the middle of the inferno was Sarah. But it wasn't her. It couldn't be. She looked wrong. Her face was writhing intensely, as if it had a mass of worms underneath the skin, struggling to hold itself together.
The coffee's ready,
she said cheerfully, as a black liquid began to pour from her eyes and outstretched smile. I let out a terrified yell and started running back towards the bedroom. The thing that wasn't Sarah gave chase while screeching in a high-pitched, inhuman voice.
"The coffee is ready. The coffee is ready. The coffee is ready."
I barged through the bedroom door, slamming and locking it behind me. The thing that wasn't Sarah began to pound on the door with such force that I was afraid it would give way at any moment. Desperate for an escape, I ran to the window and flung it open, but just as I was about to jump out, I stopped when I saw Sarah's car pulling into the driveway. I hammered my fists on the window and yelled as loud as I could, pleading for her not to come inside. But it was no use. All I could do was watch helplessly as she casually got out of her car and walked to the front door. Upon her entry, the thing at the bedroom door abruptly stopped its pounding, and there was a brief silence before it was shattered by the sound of Sarah screaming. I quickly grabbed my phone off the floor and ran out of the room. The hallway was filled with smoke, and I could barely breathe as I made my way through. I found Sarah standing in the front of the kitchen, which was now fully engulfed in flames. "We have to get out of here," I yelled, as I grabbed her arm and pulled her to the front door, getting us outside at a safe distance. I called 911. Within minutes, our street was flooded with fire trucks and police cars. An officer questioned us while the firefighters went to work putting out the blaze that was rapidly consuming the house. After talking with the officer for a few minutes, he determined that there was nothing more we could do at that time and suggested that we stay at a nearby motel for the night. I gave the officer my contact information, and he assured us that he would keep us updated on the situation. Sarah didn't go back into work, and we decided to go straight to the motel. She sat silent in the passenger seat as I drove. I knew she was mad at me. She always gave me the silent treatment when she was mad at me. I couldn't blame her, though. After all, we finally found our dream house, and I had to go and burn it down. But I didn't do it. I wanted so badly to tell her what I had seen, about the thing that looked like her and was the real cause of the fire, but I couldn't. She would have thought I was crazy, and I might have had to agree with her. What I saw couldn't have been real. It was impossible. The more likely explanation is that I came in contact with something that caused me to hallucinate. Maybe there was a gas leak. That would explain the fire. I didn't know. All I knew was I couldn't tell Sarah about it. It would take some time, but I was confident that we would get through this. It was late afternoon when we pulled into the motel parking lot. After checking in, we didn't do much for the rest of the day. Sarah locked herself in the bathroom, but I didn't say anything about it. I figured the best thing for me to do was to give her some space, and she would come around eventually. I laid in bed watching TV, and at some point I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, I was awoken by vibrations coming from my pocket. I grabbed my phone and looked to see who was calling, but I didn't recognize the number. I answered it and was greeted by the police officer that had talked to us at the scene of the fire.
"Hello, Mr. Grayson. Do you have a moment to talk?"
He said solemnly. Yes, of course. Were you able to determine the cause of the fire? I asked.
The exact cause of the fire is still unknown, but we were able to determine that it originated in the kitchen.
Yes, that's what I figured.
Mr. Grayson, was there anyone else living in the house besides you and your wife?
No, it was just us.
Did your wife happen to return to the house after you both had left?
No, we went straight to the motel and we've been here ever since. Why do you ask?
Well, the thing is, the firefighters found the charred remains of a body while searching the house. It's kind of hard to tell, but it looks a lot like your wife.
Just then, I heard the bathroom door click open. My blood ran cold as I slowly turned around to see Sarah standing in the doorway with a smile spread across her writhing face.
You know how people say that if something seems too good to be true, it usually is? Turns out they're right. I recently moved in with my boyfriend. He has a beautiful space in an old building, penthouse and everything. We hadn't been together that long, but I knew from the first time I met him that he was the one. We'd be together till death do us part, if it was up to me at least. At the beginning of the relationship, I wasn't sure if he felt the same way. He was always a bit distant. He always referred to me as babe, honey, some nickname, never my name. According to John Tucker Must Die, a movie filled to the brim with advice for life, this is a clear way of knowing that a guy is two-timing you. I'm sure he was seeing multiple girls at the beginning, but that's okay. It's the 21st century after all. But that's not what this story is about. When he asked me to move in with him, I was thrilled. I had been living in a rundown apartment with 6 other people and owned no furniture. Packing up my stuff was easy, and his apartment was a dream. I had only been over there 2 or 3 times before I moved in. For some reason, he always seemed to prefer staying at my place. Maybe it made him feel young. Who knows? Cal worked a lot, so I would spend the days alone in the flat. I'm a painter, and Cal was very supportive of my art. He told me I could use the spare bedroom as a studio, and he even convinced me to quit my waitressing job so I could dedicate all my time to my art. I loved him so much. The first days in the flat, as I was setting up the workshop, I heard sounds coming from the wall. Rats. Damn. I've lived in my fair share of crappy flats, so I'm not unfamiliar with the sounds of critters in the walls. Then the flies appeared. I was taking a break from painting, sitting on the floor of the studio, eating a slice of pizza, trying to figure out what the piece was missing. A fat fly landed on my pizza. I shook it angrily. I spotted another fat fly buzzing right next to it. I looked around the room. There were at least 5 flies there. When I told Cal about it later, he got really annoyed.
What the hell have you been doing in there?
I shrugged, frowning. His anger surprised me, made me uncomfortable.
You don't eat in there, do you?
Sometimes?
Well, maybe if you weren't such a pig, this wouldn't happen. God, if you're gonna make a mess, at least don't complain to me about it.
I'm sorry. His whole demeanor changed so fast. It didn't occur to me that it was my fault.
Oh, babe, no, I'm sorry. It's just, I've been under a lot of pressure lately. I didn't mean to take it out on you. Just ignore the flies. I'm sure they'll go away eventually.
The next day, there were even more flies. I didn't say anything to Cal. I was too worried about his reaction. There was also a strange smell in the room. I was sincerely worried that I had accidentally dropped food somewhere, so I cleaned the whole room. Nothing. I had left the window wide open since I moved in. I like to paint in the cold, so I decided the smell and the flies must be coming from somewhere outside. I closed the window. When I returned to the room after getting lunch, the smell had gotten much worse. I hadn't really noticed it as I painted, but after the fresh air from the outside, the stench was impossible to ignore. A rank stench of decay. I closed the door and opened the window. I decided I had to talk to Cal about it later. I guessed one of the rats had died in the walls or something.
Yeah, it does smell a little funky in here.
Do you think it could be rats, Cal? A dead one? In the wall, maybe?
Rats? No, we don't have rats here. No, I'm pretty sure we don't. I don't know why you'd think that. Too much paint in that little room, I think. The fumes are getting to you.
Cal's eyes went dark with anger before he managed to pull himself together. I hadn't realized how temperamental he was before I moved in with him.
You know what? I bet it's from that downstairs neighbor.
Cal's demeanor changed, and he relaxed.
You remember the weird guy we saw on the lift that first day?
I shuddered. I remembered.
I bet it's him. His apartment would be right under this room. I don't want to know what he's doing down there. Just spray some Febreze. I'm sure it'll go away eventually.
How could I forget the downstairs neighbor? I had only seen him once, the day I moved in, but it had made an impression. We had been taking the elevator down to get the last of my stuff, and it stopped on the floor below the apartment. I noticed Cal looking uncomfortable, probably anticipating the neighbor. The doors opened, and I felt my nostrils flare in objection. The man waiting outside the doors was tall, skinny, dressed in all black, and smelled worse than anyone I have ever encountered. He locked eyes with me, then let his gaze slide over to Cal, and then back to me. I shuddered involuntarily. He frowned, staring at me for several seconds. Then he entered the lift without a word. We rode down in silence. Every time I took that elevator, I worried that I'd run into him. I tried not to think about what he could be doing in his apartment to cause such a pungent odor 1 floor up. The next day were more flies, and the smell was even stronger. I called Cal at work.
You're exaggerating. It can't be that bad. Do what I said and get some Febreze and get over it. And don't disturb me at work unless it's actually important. If there is a rat there, the smell will go away eventually. Don't be such a prima donna.
I didn't really want to press the issue. He seemed to be really stressed. I just kept the door closed and the window open and doused the whole room with Febreze like he told me to. I spent the day sketching outside instead, unable to handle the stench. The smell didn't improve. It just got worse. I wanted to paint, but I couldn't stand being in that room. I was probably being a bit of a diva, but Cal didn't have to work in that smell. I thought about the sounds I'd heard the first days. To me, that had sounded like some very big rats. One of those dying in my wall could definitely stink up a room. But maybe Cal was right after all. Maybe it was the downstairs neighbor. I figured I had to talk to that weird guy. At least I'd give it a shot. After talking myself up, I went to ring his doorbell. As the door cracked open, the smell of stale sweat and cat piss rolled over me. I almost staggered backwards. He opened the door just as much as the security chain would allow. Excuse me, sir. I live right upstairs. I just moved in with... I stopped myself short as I saw him start to slowly close the door. Sorry, I'll be fast. It's just a bit awkward, but there's kind of a smell in our apartment. His eyes went wide, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me. The door stopped moving. My boyfriend suggested that maybe you... I faltered. His gaze didn't waver for a moment. I stood there for 10 seconds, considering whether I should run. In the end, my social conditioning not to be rude took over. I tried again. There's a bit of a weird smell in our apartment, and my boyfriend suggested that you might know something about it. His face contorted into a frown. He still didn't say anything. I mean, I don't know. I was flailing. Do you know if there's rats in the building? I finished, defeated. He smiled.
No rats. Cats.
Okay, well, bye then. I turned, walking quickly down the hall. The door slammed shut behind me. A moment later, I heard it open again, and he called after me.
Lady, maybe you shouldn't be here, lady.
I turned, only to see his door slam shut for the second time. I continued walking, thoroughly unsettled. The door opened again. I didn't turn around, I just started walking faster.
Maybe not so safe, lady, with rats.
Frantically, I pressed the elevator button over and over. I heard the door click shut behind me. I swore to not ever talk to that guy again. Whatever the hell he was doing to make our beautiful home smell like death, I didn't want to know. Back in the apartment, the odor had started to spread into the living room. I realized I was scared that Cal would get mad. I knew he thought I had messed something up in the workshop. The idea that I was scared of his reaction unsettled me. He was the love of my life, after all. I decided I was nervous because I wanted him to be happy, that I didn't want him to be stressed about anything else. I decided I wasn't scared of him. I loved him, after all. As I went over our relationship in my head, it hit me that the smell here was completely different from the downstairs apartment. There, It smelled like stale sweat and old cat urine. Here, it smelled like death. No rats, my ass. A large rat in the wall was the only explanation. I figured it was time to call an exterminator. I briefly considered calling Cal to see if he had any objections, but then I remembered how mad he'd been the last time I called him at work. He thought I was behaving like a princess. I decided I'd just do it on my own and dip into the little money I had left. I couldn't paint in a room like that. And I was a grown woman. I could handle my own problems. I called an exterminator. He referred me to a guy that specialized in removing dead rats from walls. Apparently that's a thing. Lucky for me, he had a cancellation, so he could come right over. The moment he arrived, he took one sniff and confirmed my suspicions.
Oh, yes, you have a dead rat. Probably several. You know, this happens sometimes when people put out rat poison. Their nest is probably in your wall and they crawled back in here to die. But don't worry about a thing, ma'am. I'll take care of it. I just have to cut a hole in the wall. Is that okay?
I frowned, thinking Cal would get upset. But then again, he never goes into the studio. I figured I could just put a canvas in front of the hole and get it fixed.
With these exposed bricks, it's really easy to patch it back up. Just slap on some mortar and chuck the bricks back in place. Anyone could do it. You wouldn't be able to tell at all.
I told him to go ahead. I was sitting in the kitchen when the police showed up. I was sitting in the interrogation room when they told me about the dead body they found behind the wall. I was sitting in the lawyer's office when they told me it was the remains of Cal's previous girlfriend. I was sitting in the witness box in the courtroom when they told me he had left her there to die a slow, horrifying death. I was sitting in the stands when they gave him life without parole for premeditated murder. But I was sitting all alone in a cheap motel when I realized that she had still been alive when I moved in. The building really didn't have rats.
Kicking in the boarded doors to the ossuary, Clinton shined his LED spotlight into the small church. The bright blue light illuminated pews, a pulpit, and a giant in disrepair crucifix above that, all draped in cobwebs. The skeletal remains of nearly 100 people stared at him from mangled, crunched positions around the small chapel. They were morbid fixtures, carefully laying in the white canvas-colored walls. They encircled the church in a ring of remembrance. Black wide sockets glared at Clinton with unfeeling judgment. Swallowing hard, he walked into the forgotten holy edifice, quickly inspecting its inner foundation, much like he had so many times before when entering a cave in search of lost items or hidden treasure. Clinton carefully tapped the floorboards with the tip of his boot and scanned the walls instinctively for any odd formations or unusual shadows. He wished he was in one of his caves right now rather than this tomb. Everything was so different. When you enter a cave, you have to feel out the foundation as well as observe it. You have to watch where you put your feet, your hands, your everything. One misstep and you could fall into a precipice. It took work to get into a cave and truly enjoy its warm, vibrant underground. Here, it was like it was inviting him in, welcoming him to the cold, colorless nether. Shaking his head, he proceeded further into the church, disagreeing with the whole scenario of what he was doing. Clinton thought back as to how he had gotten into this situation. Walking through the small town of Antezula, Chile, South America was where he did most of his cavernous expeditions. He had done some out-of-the-way islands in the South China Sea, the coast of Japan, and even some exploring in Africa and its humid systems. He had been delivered a letter from one Emmanuel Constance. It said for him to meet her in a small restaurant just 6 blocks down the way at the Palmetto Sombra. It was a pretty restaurant for being in such a poor town. Clinton remembered it vividly. A porch faced the shaded side of the street surrounded by a wrought iron gate, holding at least 10 or so umbrella tables. Emmanuel was sitting under one of them and tipped her glass, a signal that she was waiting. An expensive briefcase sat next to her. A good sign she was going to pay him in advance. Sitting down at her table, Clinton was slightly surprised by her order. A strawberry martini with a hint of rum. A light drink with a strong shot. A drink not for such a petite woman of 5'5" and seemingly 110, maybe 120 pounds. She drank it quickly, while Clinton had a cheap shot of pure rum. She got right to the point and said that she would like to acquire a family heirloom of some sort. She showed him some pictures of a silver ring with an ostentatious emerald jewel. Her rosy, wet cheeks and tired, faded eyes told him she didn't want it for financial gains. Her cracking, sad voice told him she wanted it for a keepsake. Unfortunately, the family member connected with it, her sister, aunt or something, had been buried with it. It had been taken to a church that was now off limits to the general public. The only thing allowed there was either the dead or people attending to the dead, so she was not allowed. If she was caught there, she would be arrested. Emmanuel had heard of Clinton through some upper-class social circles and believed he was the perfect man for the job. Clinton had to disagree. He was a spelunking expert and cave negotiating master. On occasion, he was a paid hunter of dangerous animals. Pilfering human remains was decisively out of his league, or at least it was until he saw the kind of pay he would get for such a job. 30,000 USD, and enough to pay for a plane ticket first class to a destination of his choosing. He dare not say no. This was how he found himself in the dreary chapel with the full moon high in the sky. The lunar light cascaded through the jungle, surrounding the church like pillars of twilight. The noisy orchestra of insects and fauna played loudly in his ears through broken stained glass windows. Croaking frogs, buzzing insects, the occasional monkey hoot, and every now and again, he would step on a shard of stained glass, cracking it loudly. This made the symphony play louder. It didn't help the already overwhelming anxiety he had from the stories he had heard even before accepting the job. The stories of a damned church of the dead, of an unholy tabernacle that was so overcome by dead spirits that no living thing was welcome there. Clinton believed in many things. He had to. Local legends and villager superstitions were where most of his jobs came from. Even the lion he had hunted in North Africa was believed to be a messenger of the devil. It died to gunfire, though, just like everything else, demonic feline or no. It wasn't a question of whether he thought the place was actually dangerous. He just knew it wasn't anything like spirits or damned souls awakened from grim slumber by an odd jobs man. Some of the stories indicated that none would ever return. Not a trace of them was ever found. Maybe a few things on ground level, but that was it. The church was a 3-story building. There was the ground floor, which was the floor Clinton was on. The basement, where the men of God had kept their paperwork, what little there was of it, with a few beds for the sick or the infirm. Then there was the lowest, most confusing level, the underground catacombs, the ossuary proper. There were nearly 20,000 buried in the stone-walled labyrinth. Clinton hoped he wouldn't have to go down there, but he figured he would have to, otherwise his expertise was moot. It still kind of was. Caves, natural caves, were unpredictable, but they gave you certain signs of which way you were heading. If you heard water, you were heading to a drop-off, so watch your footing. If you heard wind, you were coming to an exit somewhere. If you saw the flora of the cave get slim, you were heading toward an animal's den. He was at a loss for what to do if he found himself turned around in a man-made tunnel network full of corpses. What was he supposed to do then? Check to see which way the skulls were pointing and hope they might lead him out? Sorry, lady, I stick with caves, Clinton thought. That's what he should have said. This is way out of my league. Why don't you ask some reverend or a monk to go down there for you? Any of that wouldn't have been too hard to say. He needed the money, though. He wanted out of South America. Maybe go to North America and scour through some of their caves. The Ozarks were always fun. Short and uneventful, but fun. He was next to the pulpit when he looked up at the cross. The planks were covered in cobwebs. Clinton's light showcased the shadows cast by the webbing and crucifix. That same sad, forlorn look on Christ's face, one of agony and regret. The cobwebs, a stark silken blasphemy against his sacrifice. The cross looked like it was barely hung up. The nails hammered in were old and rusted. Even though with all the obvious signs of disrepair, it still came as a fearful shock when it tumbled down from the wall. It landed hard on the ground and broke into splintered pieces. The white clay body of Christ cracked and separated. If Clinton didn't know better, he could have sworn he heard a scream come from the broken icon when it fell. Finally catching his breath, he shined his light nervously at the broken crucifix. The pieces were shattered remnants of the Savior, his face nothing more than a pile of white dusty remains. Even a few spiders scattered out from the broken body of Christ, no longer having a solid home. Clinton wasn't the religious sort, but he was still scared about going down into the bowels of the dark church. A sign like that was hard to ignore, whether you believe in God or not. If you did, then it speaks for itself. If not, then you didn't want to imagine what might happen when you reached the older parts. They might just give way and bring the whole building down on top of you. $30,000, Clinton reminded himself, an extremely hard payday to pass up. Stepping over the broken symbol, Clinton found a door to his left. It was a small wooden door that looked like it hadn't been used in years, but he decided to turn the knob anyway. It creaked with age and whined with neglect. The gold-painted knob turned with some force, but even then, Clinton had to push with his shoulder to open the door. Sidestepping in, he shined his light down a long wooden stairwell with a stone wall to his right, behind the old door. There were a few candle sconces on the right, but he had no means to light them. All he had was his trusty spotlight with 8 hours of battery life, a backup flashlight for emergencies, some road flares, which he dared not waste on candles, and a few glow sticks. The bright LED beam pierced through the overabundant darkness, the steps barely visible even in the powerful ray of light. Wooden, rickety steps. It didn't take an architect to tell Clinton that this wasn't the safest idea. Edging his boot onto the first step made it cry out, just like the door had with age. Only this was more bass-filled, and it did feel a little sturdier than the door. Didn't mean that Clinton wasn't hesitant to walk down them. He sighed and proceeded down the stairwell. Just like crossing a ledge, he thought to himself. By the 12th step, Clinton was feeling pretty good. He only had a few more steps to go before he reached the safety of the cement floor. This was actually easier than any cave expedition he had ever done. Maybe I should accept more jobs like this? Clinton thought. It seemed safer to scour old buildings like this than go cave exploring. Stepping on the next step, Clinton heard that same creak and relaxed. His weight suddenly gave way underneath as he heard a loud snap. His spotlight flew in the air, spinning like a damaged helicopter, landing a foot away from him. Meanwhile, Clinton tumbled down to the cement floor and landed face first. His legs folded into a pretzel between the steps, and his chest ached with a punch from the last. After Clinton made sure he was still alive, he tried to lift himself. His left ankle locked up, and a rack of pain ripped through that leg. He groaned, clenching his teeth as he turned to look at his discombobulated legs. He could feel them, but couldn't see them in the overbearing darkness. He pulled his right one out of the staircase just fine. His left one, however, seemed to come with a price. Pain again struck his ankle and leg like a lightning bolt. He couldn't see what had happened since his spotlight was pointed at the wall. Not wanting to risk damaging his left ankle anymore, Clinton crawled over to his light and grabbed at it like a chained monkey after food. Finally, he got his digits over the handle and pointed it at his bad ankle. The damaged appendage was a stark tan and red of flesh and blood. A breath of relief came over him. Oh, it was damaged, no doubt about that, but it wasn't broken or fractured. There was quite a bit of blood seeping from it, though. A simple rag around it, and it would be fine. Leaving the light on the floor, Clinton ripped off a piece of his shirt and wrapped it around his ankle. He tightened it as much as he could. The knot made in the fabric was the worst part. Still lying there, jumbled on the steps, Clinton could have sworn he saw something in the dark. It was fast and blurred. It looked like a person with gray skin and a humongous head. It moved too quick, though, faster than any person could have, or should have. Not to mention that even if there was somebody in the dark, Clinton shouldn't have been able to see them. It was too dark to see your hand in front of your face. He acted instinctively and grabbed his large flashlight, scanning for the mysterious person. Nothing. Sighing, Clinton stood up and favored his left ankle. He slowly put his weight down and felt just a tiny twitch of pain. He was already starting to feel better, however, his neck was a bit stiff. He stretched his head a little, failing to get all the kinks out. That was okay. He'd get a good massage later. Forgetting about the gray person, passing it off as nothing more than a mind trick of the accident, Clinton walked further into the belly of the church. His powerful blue light glided across the cement floor in front of him. A long stone hallway lay out before him with encompassing blackness behind him. His light shined on a few different disturbing things. One was a lonely-looking wooden dresser. It had an icon on it and a candelabra. Some hints of melted wax were on the candelabra, but no candles. Spider webbing dangled from it, caught in the old wax. The icon was an intricate crucifix, the body of Jesus nailed to it in severe pain. The cross's 3 points blossomed out into another 3 cloves each. It was a classic, expensive-looking thing. Clinton wondered how much he could get for it. The right buyer, he could stand to make a nice extra profit. Picking it up to inspect it, Clinton felt a great searing pain streak through his hand. He yelled out and dropped the crucifix. It landed on the floor, and just like the one upstairs, exploded into pieces. Clinton couldn't help but curse. God damn it! He usually wasn't that clumsy with artifacts, but he usually didn't get hurt by them either. Shining his light on his hand, a long red mark was across his palm, like the icon had been searing to the touch. With his light ahead of him, Clinton saw 2 rows of cheap metal-framed hospital beds. They lay at opposite ends of the hallway, each one a stained flat rectangle identical to the other. Years of abuse and neglect led to their sorry states. He walked among them like in a graveyard full of unidentified tombstones. Clinton felt a cold, unnerving chill run up his spine and hoped that a body wouldn't appear in one of the beds. It was a ridiculous fear, but that didn't cause him not to think it. The last bed on the left had chains over the headboard. Clinton stopped and looked at it longer than he should have. An eerie, questionable feeling prevalent about the last one on the left. He couldn't help but whisper to himself, "Why would they need chains?" Then the bed itself seemed to change. It changed from its metal frame to a wicker frame. Green large leaves made up the matting, but not any trees from South American tropics. The cool chill in the hallway changed to a deep, arid heat Clinton recognized from the African savanna. The monotone buzz of mosquitoes filled his ears. His mind and body were somehow playing this evil sensory trick on him. It now looked like the deathbed of a little African boy he once knew. The boy was stricken with scarlet fever. The chains there to keep him pinned down so he wouldn't hurt himself when the fever caused involuntary spasms, and Clinton was hired to delve into a cave far east from the boy's village for a plant that would save his life. Unfortunately for the boy, a wealthy drug organization had promised Clinton a much larger payday than the villagers. He'd already been paid by the common folk on good faith, so he delivered the plant to the pharmaceutical company instead of the boy. The boy was dead 4 days later, and Clinton was traveling, first class, to a different country by then, having escaped their proverbial torches and pitchforks. Yet here he was, staring down an empty African villager's bed, in a South American chapel. The African sounds just as vibrant as they had been when the desperate villagers first approached him. Even the heat was as oppressive as it had been back then. He was in Africa right now, back in that village, looking at an empty bed. Turning from it, shaking his head, Clinton turned back and the bed was metal again. The chains still hung over the headboard. That cool, haunted air had returned, a reminder of where he actually was. Sighing with relief, he walked on. Just an effect of seeing the chains, that's all, he thought. That was a long time ago. So long, in fact, the boy would be a man by now, if he were still alive, but he's not. There was a comfort to Clinton in that thought. Locking his light on a basin sink, he went over to it and looked it over. It was just a simple porcelain sink. It looked a lot like a big snifter glass to Clinton. "Blessed be," Clinton remarked scornfully. Turning from the sink, he proceeded down the dark stone hallway, his light almost giving him a full line of sight. When he reached the end, a metal plaque was to the left and written on it in both English and Spanish, "Please be respectful of the dead. If for any reason you believe that you haven't found a loved one or believe that a loved one has been misplaced, please get an Episcopal attendee immediately. 1 through 20,000. This was it. The descent into the labyrinthine underground tombs of the thousands dead. Clinton took a long, thought-filled sigh and walked down the stone slabs called steps. 1 foot after another, he sunk into a sea of blackness, darker than the darkest cave he had ever been in. It was even colder than it was on the sub-level above, giving Clinton goosebumps. His skin broke out as his breath made a plume. He could see it in the hint of his spotlight. When he reached the very bottom, he stepped in mush. Shining his light down, he saw he was standing in dirt. Dug up, laid out, colorless dirt. It looked like plenty of other dirt he had stood in, but somehow it was different. The very idea that dead bodies were in it perhaps changed it for him. He wasn't sure himself, but this dirt was void black, looking like big clumps of dark pepper. It had an ominous feel to it, like he would be buried in it. Once again, relying on his trusty handle spotlight, Clinton walked through the dirt onward. Cautiously, he flashed his LED beam in all directions. It was more of an instinctual movement than anything. You had to be aware of your entire surroundings when in a cave, above, below, and all around. The skeletal remains of the dead surrounded him. Each one lay in a small alcove in the stone walls, a number beneath each, artfully carved. Every skeleton looked roughly the same, laying down, staring upwards at their unseen bunkmate. Clinton had taken a few turns in the box-like tombs, looking for his prize. The underground crypts had less twists than what he initially believed. This still might be easier than he thought. He knew the exact crypt number, 14,704. Right now he was wandering through the 500s. He had quite a ways to go before he got to the right spot. The emotionless faces stared back at him. Blank, dead, decomposed bones with cold black blossom sockets glared at Clinton, almost like they were judging him for past deeds he had not yet answered for. He wasn't planning on answering for them either. He had done what he thought was right for himself. These skeletal onlookers could gawk all they wanted and judge him however they wanted to. They were dead. What could they possibly do to him? Though he did wonder why he didn't believe that. The cold down in the lower ossuary was different from any other. He wasn't sure if that was because the ground was cold or if it was something else, something otherworldly. It skittered up and down his spine and delved into his skin like unseen tentacles that pushed through his flesh. It made him shiver as he headed through the dark underground. A thin layer of sweat began to gloss his skin. Usually it was caused by the oppressive, humid heat of the South American rainforests. Now, it was due to fear. Progressing through the 700s, a smell began to fill his lungs. It wasn't a pungent smell, just a disagreeable one. It was the smell of the long since dead. It was an unmistakable odor. After the horrendous, rotten stench of decay and biodegradation had gone, this was the aroma that was left behind, this mediocre, languorous air that catches your throat and stays there, making it itch and dry out. Coming to the first of the 1000s, Clinton saw a few names seemingly of Argentinian descent: Guvaro, Halbanero, Ferrario, Elliot Knight. Clinton stopped and shook with unbridled fear. His eyes widened and he reread the name 8 times. You shouldn't be here. Yet he was. Unlike the bones that surrounded the corpse, Elliot was nearly all intact, his stomach freshly rend from his body with blood running down the stone wall, his eyes wide open with dead dilated pupils that stared right into Clinton's soul. He looked just like he had when Clinton found him all those years ago in Africa, half-eaten and wide-eyed. The red river from Elliot's gullet ran over his carved name below his alcove. It made his name clearer than any number on any given slab. Elliot Knight was a partner of Clinton's a long time ago during his lion hunt in North Africa. He remembered everything about Elliot, even the way he had fed him to the lion to get away on the second night. He remembered how he screamed in the savannah darkness, a blood-curdling shrill that Clinton heard clearly as he ran for his life through the tall grass. The same tall grass the lion had been hiding in, waiting for them. Elliot's life-ending howl echoed through the night like a dying impala, a crystal-clear reminder to Clinton that he was out of his league. Clinton didn't feel he had a choice. He had shoved Elliot at the lunging dark yellow torpedo when it came for them. Neither of the hunters had time to react. Clinton just reacted on pure instinct. Elliot wasn't as much of an expert as Clinton. The young, zealous 20-something was just starting out. Of course he had to die, Clinton thought. An inexperienced whelp like that? He should have thrown himself in front of the lion to protect me. The expert cave explorer had agreed to show Elliot the ropes, training him up on how to hunt lions and other African wildlife. The very notion to Clinton that he should protect that rookie was preposterous. Elliot had to die. He had to. You had to! Clinton screamed at the blank-faced, ghostly white corpse of Elliot. The Red River made a pitter-patter in the dirt with crimson droplets, his stone-carved name outlined by the sanguine falls. Hearing a noise in the dark, Clinton whipped his light around and shined it at multiple skeletons, not a one looking like they had moved. They all lay there, motionless, skinless, lifeless. Hovering the beam of light over each one, even flashing it up at the ceiling, he began to breathe hard, trying to listen for the noise again. His light glossed over a figure standing not more than 10 feet from him, a humanoid figure. Gray skin covered its emaciated body as it loomed in the light, its back to Clinton. Its spine protruded through its skin. Small skeletal bumps similar to crocodile spines ran along its skinny torso from its gangly neck to its grotesque buttocks. Long dangling arms extended to its knees, swaying in the light, the figure dancing to some unknown music. A massive round head atop its shoulders, too big for the phantom's thin body to carry. It bobbed to the left and right, unbalanced. Clinton didn't wait around to see what it truly was. He ran from it. The light in his hand bobbed up and down as he ran. His left ankle dug into his leg with pain. He fought through it as he ran and turned corner after corner. He hoped against hope to never see or hear the gray person again. He lost count of how many corridors of skeletons he passed, how many forks he had turned down. Random directions were all he chose, not really thinking about any direction at all. He thought he was running, but what he really was doing was scampering away. Finally coming to a stop, gasping for air, he leaned over and fell to his knees. The loose soil filled his vision. Clinton's neck hurt him something fierce, and his ankle wasn't treating him much better. He shined his light on his left leg. His ankle was now mangled and bruised. Maybe he had re-injured it or something? It looked worse now than ever. A fist-sized deep purple blotch covered it with bloodstains caked on his skin. Grunting with pain, he nearly tumbled into the dirt. His neck felt like it had hammers in it, and they were all pounding the same spot. He tried to turn his neck, but it was encased in stiff, transparent cement. Every time he tried to turn, it would scream with punches of pain. Grunting again, Clinton stood up and growled at both his ankle and his neck. Once he was to his feet, he looked around to see where he was. Maybe he could find his way back from numbering on the open crypts. His light shined on one, reading 2,435,667. What? His mind screamed. That's not possible. There's not that many down here. Not over 2 million. Where the hell am I? Flashing his light around, confused and afraid, Clinton began to walk back the way he came, knowing that there was a turn. He did come to a turn, but not like the last one he ran down. This one branched in 3 different directions. He could have sworn it hadn't earlier. Just a fork last time, just a measly fork. Caves don't do this. Ignoring the new corridor, he tried to go down the one he had been through before. All the skeletons still gawked at him, forever part of the walls. They even seemed to be getting closer. Maybe he was delusional? Maybe he was imagining all this and he was just letting fear get the better of him? Clinton tried to calm himself as he headed down what he thought was the right way. Yet he could have sworn they hadn't been that close before. So close that he felt there was only 2 feet between him and the looming dead. The real problem, though, was the numbers weren't decreasing. They were increasing. 2,458,889, 2,610,004, 2,825,677, 2,838,666. Hitting nearly 3 million, Clinton stopped and gasped for air. That thick air was now heavier, and that told him he was getting deeper. He had gone in a straight line, though. No matter what path or avenue he took, he had gone in a straight line. There were no more steps, no more lower parts. So how come he felt he was going lower? That cold stillness felt the same, but he knew the elevation had dropped significantly. He felt buried under miles of earth. Shining his light around to see something recognizable, he proceeded more slowly. The numbers slowly ticked upwards to 3 million. This wasn't right. Maybe if he went back, he'd already made quite a bit of progress through the corridor. To head back would be heading back towards the grave figure. He had to find a way out regardless. Going the way he was, he would hit bedrock by sunrise. Sunrise, Clinton thought. How good it would be to feel the sun's rays again, that warm South American heat. It was worth climbing, crawling, or even digging his way out of the accursed maze-like tomb, if only to feel the sun again. Forget that stupid, useless silver ring. Emmanuel could keep her paltry $30,000 in first-class tickets. Clinton could find another job. Other jobs. True, maybe not one that paid as well, but definitely something in a cave or a grotto. Get back to his expertise. He'd give almost anything to be in a cave right now, even one of those frozen ice caves in the Arctic tundra, if it meant not spending another second surrounded by skeletal walls. Smiling to himself, Clinton forced himself back. He nearly jogged through the skeletal remains, confident he was heading in the right direction. The long since deceased passed by him like a morbid Mobius strip. Bone pile after bone pile went by. He ignored the clawing pain in his ankle, the firm stiffness in his neck. He was determined to get back to the surface. Whether sun or stars, it was his primary goal now. All he had to do was find the cross corridors he had come by before. Maybe he missed that extra corridor the first time? He had run by it pretty fast to escape the emaciated figure. After what felt like half a day of walking and no crossroads in sight, Clinton fell to his knees. A cold sweat broke out over his body. Worn and waned, he sucked in more of that chilled, still lethargic air. He shined his light at one of the stone alcoves. 7,432,211. With a defeated and tired, "Damn it." Clinton sat back and leaned against the stone wall. His breaths were akin to gasps, as if his lungs were trying to reach out for sense of the situation. He looked down both directions and saw nothing but the same long stretch of stones and bones mirrored on each side. Clinton had to bend his knees as he sat there. He made the observation that the walls were now closer together than before. It was barely enough room to fit himself comfortably. Before he could have laid out and his head would have been pressed against the back wall. Now there was barely a foot from each wall, barely enough room to fit him erect, let alone sat there in oppressive darkness. As he stayed crumpled up for more than half an hour, Clinton heard an all too familiar noise again. the sound of bleak, short shifts in the dirt. It sounded like sand being grated. He shined his light down the way he thought he heard it. To his left and right was emptiness. The spotlight flickered down both corridors. He brought the light to him and knocked on it, trying to get it to stop. He even shook it a few times for good measure. All it did was flash at him in defiance. Don't you dare," Clinton whispered at it. The sound got closer. What little was left of Clinton's resolve and usually cool demeanor faded away. Like before, with Elliot Knight's mutilated corpse in the catacombs, a fear came over Clinton, stronger than any he had ever felt before. It strangled his chest and seemed embedded in the darkness that surrounded him. It drove into him like hooks, wriggling hooks that dug into his body. His spotlight took a few more blinks of light and then faded away as it left Clinton in total darkness. Cold, complete, unyielding, forlorn darkness. He heard the noise again and had his hands around one of his road flares in no time. He snapped it and it hissed to life with a bright red glow. A crimson luminescence pushed back some of the blackness, maybe more than his spotlight, definitely enough to light a good radius around him. Getting up, Clinton held his flare like a strong torch. He left his spotlight on the ground and began to walk in a random direction. Trembling like a withered old man, feeling about as strong as one, he took each step carefully, like he was entering a cave. A cave that was getting bigger and bigger as the walls were getting smaller and smaller. The bones around him were so close by now that if any of them wanted to take a bite out of Clinton, they could do so with little effort. He sometimes scraped his shoulder against the stone walls as he slouched through the skeleton-riddled corridor. It was a small pain compared to his aching ankle and his locked neck. Clinton was so fixated on his goal, he hadn't noticed that the numbers were gone. Just blank slabs of stone underneath the skeletons were left. Tight granite stone walls littered with bones. Bones and stones. No more corridors or different routes, just long pathway made up of nothing but bones and stones. The flare snapped a bit and then flickered out, leaving Clinton in the chill of buried darkness for a few seconds. He pulled out another and struck it to life. Like the first, it hissed with light, revealing the tight claustrophobic catacombs in red luminosity. Clinton walked onward, his feet like cement as he dragged them along. That ankle of his getting ever more painful by the minute, every step a strike of anguish. Forever slouching in one direction that when he came to a turn, it was a shock. A smile came at this revelation, but it was short-lived. He was met with a wall of night and heat. African night, African heat. Tall blades of grass brushed by his legs as he walked through the dim night. The buzzing of mosquitoes traveled on the oppressive wind that blew past Clinton. He nearly choked on it because of his stiff neck. In the distance was an object. It looked like a body. Approaching it, Clinton saw that this was indeed a dead body. It wasn't Elliot Knight, though, or even the small boy he had abandoned in Africa all those years ago. This dead body was his own, laid out in a clearing with his face down, his head nearly on backwards, his left ankle turned completely around with some wooden steps behind his corpse which led up into the sky. "I remember this," Clinton whispered out. If he could have, he would have screamed, but he was far too tired and far too filled with fright to do anything different. "But I lived. God damn it, I got back up." Suddenly something tight, strong, and mean grabbed his shoulders and turned him around. Clinton barely managed to stay on his feet, jerked by the powerful force. His road flare tumbled out of his grasp and onto the ground below. The gray, emaciated humanoid figure stood before him with its huge head. A roar blasted out of its mouth, giving Clinton a clear view of giant razor-sharp teeth. Yellow fur covered its cheeks and forehead in the shape of a giant mane. Green, piercing cat eyes stared down at Clinton with rage and hate swirling inside them. The lion's mouth enveloped Clinton's head and bit it from his shoulders. After feeling his neck sever and all the blood spill out from his face, the inside of the lion's mouth faded into total blackness. Seconds later, Clinton was able to open his eyes again and he was sat in the stone corridor. his first flare in hand with that light sand-grating noise coming towards him. He was back in the long, shrinking corridor of stones and bones. Getting back up, he looked in the opposite direction of the noise. Tired, hurt, beaten, and broken, Clinton began to shuffle his own feet away from the danger. Despite his stiff neck and destroyed ankle, he pushed himself onward. He had nearly no memory of what had happened to him before. He knew something bad had happened to him, something that had terrified him to his very soul. But what it was, he struggled to recollect. All he knew now was to get out of the labyrinth. Maybe this was the right direction? Once again, he left his spotlight behind and trusted nothing but the bright glow of his hissing red torch. He was still very unaware of the vanished numbers as he pressed on through the darkness. Didn't matter how long the corridor may be or how deep in the massive ossuary he was, Clinton would keep pressing towards the steps he had come down before to get out. To get away from that horrid figure, he would press on forever.
While he waited for Kevin, Ricky read the poster tacked to the telephone pole across the street. Under the words "Missing Dog" was a black and white photo of a fuzzy mutt wearing a Santa hat and a name. The name Skipper was printed below the photo along with a phone number and address. Ricky disregarded it almost immediately. He hadn't seen the thing, and besides, it wasn't his dog. He turned and called to his brother.
"You're such a baby."
He leaned against the guardrail and spat a foamy wad of saliva over the curb and down into the creek below. On the sidewalk, his younger brother Kevin chewed his lip hesitantly and glanced along either side of the street to see if anyone heard. No one was out except one old lady watering her lawn 4 houses up.
"Am not. You're the baby. A big fat baby girl."
Ricky smiled sweetly back and shrugged. In the fall, he'd be in the 6th grade, and 6th graders couldn't be harmed by the feeble insults of scaredy-cat little kids. He began singing in a high-pitched, whiny voice.
"Rock-a-bye, Kevin, in the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock."
Kevin made his way over to the guardrail and peered nervously into the shady throat of the creek. Lush, overhanging trees and bushes clung to its sloping banks. Up on the sidewalk, out amongst the well-kept yards and newly built houses, it was high summer, hot and humid. But down there, down where the dark water whispered around large flat rocks, it would be cool and gloomy. There might be snakes. There might be all kinds of things. It was a wild and secret place. A dark green gash in the lacquered facade of suburban sprawl. The creek itself spilled out from a concrete culvert that ran beneath Cedar Drive. It cut a trickling, crooked course through a line of trees that rambled behind the development for miles. Ricky saw the reluctance on his younger brother's face and sighed.
"Come on, man. Don't you want to see an entire abandoned neighborhood? Jamie Lynch says it's badass."
He pulled a small flashlight from his back pocket.
"We'll have this for inside the houses."
Kevin tried not to look worried.
"So, we're actually going in somebody's house?" "They're empty houses, stupid. And yes, what'd you think we were doing?"
Kevin shook his head.
"Ricky, I don't want to do this. Maybe Mom will take us to the pool. And we could go ask her. Let's go ask her right now."
Ricky glowered down at his little brother, exasperated.
"Jesus Christ, Kev, you're such a little pussy."
He felt a little bad seeing how Kevin recoiled at the harshness of the word and tried to soften his tone a little.
"We can go to the pool later. I want to go see the abandoned houses."
He gestured with the small flashlight, waving it vaguely at the woods.
"Don't you want to see that? It'll be like the ruins on Johnny Quest. We'll be like Johnny and Haji."
Kevin squinted up at Ricky.
"Well, who's going to be Johnny and who's going to be Haji?"
Ricky rolled his eyes and grunted.
"Oh, God, you can be Johnny, okay? And I'll be Haji. You can lead the expedition and pick the first treasure to bring home."
He held the flashlight out to Kevin, butt end first.
"I'll even let you carry the flashlight."
Kevin reached out reluctantly, his fingers grazing the plastic hilt of the flashlight.
What if Mom calls for us? What if we get in trouble?
Ricky flapped his hand, dismissing this concern.
Don't be such a goody-good. Nobody's going to get in trouble. When was the last time Mom called for us in the middle of the day? What about that time Dad came early to get us for the weekend?
The younger boy's eyes were filled with doubt. Ricky threw his hands up in frustration and shouted,
That was a Friday. Today is Wednesday. Nobody's coming to get us. Mom's asleep on the couch. Please act like you've got some balls and come exploring with me. I swear to God, if you just do this, I'll go to school and tell everybody how cool you are.
Kevin smiled despite his apprehension.
For real? Yes.
Ricky hiked one leg over the guardrail and stepped onto the concrete lip of the culvert.
For real. Now come on.
He climbed the rest of the way over, and Kevin, with a final longing glance back at the sunlit street, followed along. The boys hung from the culvert and dropped, their sneakers plunging into the ankle-deep water. It was shockingly cold on such a hot day. They turned and headed up the center of the stream. Ricky made no effort to stay dry, kicking and splashing, soaking his shorts and shirt thoroughly. Kevin, by contrast, stepped cautiously from rock to rock, keeping his feet out of the water as much as possible. They tromped along the creek for a good half hour before encountering a sharp bend to the right. The boys followed this, and soon the stream narrowed to a bare trickle just a few inches in width. Thick, dark mud clung to their shoes, and sticker bushes scratched at their clothes. They hadn't seen any snakes or frogs, but bugs were plentiful. Spindly-legged mosquitoes buzzed from all around, lighting on the boys' arms, necks, and knees, drawing blood before flitting off again. There were moths fluttering sluggishly through the shadows, and a choir of crickets, cicadas, and katydids singing from the bushes and trees. Ricky stopped, bent down, and flipped over a huge flat stone riddled with fossilized shells, holding it up on its side.
Want some lunch, Kev?
He smiled wickedly as dozens of gigantic black water bugs trundled busily through the dripping water along the rock's underside. Kevin yelped and nearly tripped over his own feet as he backpedaled. Ricky laughed at his brother until one of the bugs crawled over the edge of the stone and onto his hand. Ricky let out a startled scream and dropped the rock, shaking his arm wildly to dislodge the intruder. Kevin exploded into a hysterical fit of giggles as his brother hopped and jittered, howling with revulsion. When Ricky realized the bug was gone, he became still and favored his brother with a steely glare that dried up all the younger boy's laughter. He jabbed a ferocious finger in the air to punctuate his words.
I hope to God something big and nasty crawls on you like that. I can't wait to laugh my ass off and just watch you scream.
Kevin's expression drooped miserably.
I'm sorry, Ricky. I didn't mean it.
Ricky scowled at his brother for another few icy seconds before turning and resuming the path.
Come on.
Kevin followed behind silently at a distance, his shoes churning mud as he shuffled with downcast eyes. Midday had come and gone by the time the boys stumbled out of the thinning screen of trees into the horseshoe-shaped clearing. The clearing sloped forward and then dropped 20 feet into a wide, bowl-shaped gully. At the far end of the bowl, the ground climbed back up a grassy incline, becoming the highway. The boys could see tractor trailers, tiny in the distance, silhouetted against the summer sky. Up on the rise, the trees continued along the left-hand side of the horseshoe and became thick again beyond the gully. Ricky walked over to where the ground dropped off and peered over the edge.
Kev.
Ricky motioned his brother over with a flick of his hand.
Come here.
The younger boy joined his brother at the edge of the drop-off and looked to where Ricky was pointing. Down below, on the floor of the gully, were 3 derelict houses languishing in varying degrees of disrepair. All of them were tall, wooden affairs with steeply pitched roofs and gabled porches. The one closest to the highway was in the best shape of the 3. It stood tall and proud despite its mottled peeling clapboards and shattered windows. The post supporting the porch roof leaned a little to the right, giving the house a disapproving sneer, but it seemed solid enough. The house in the middle was also still standing, and there were even some faded scrapes of paint left to show that it had once been yellow. However, the porch had at some point collapsed, and now the pointed gable lay in the lap of the front yard in a pile of wood chunks and rubble. Planking had been stripped from the outer side wall, letting sunlight in to show a decayed piano tipped over on its back. The house closest to the drop-off, the one that Ricky planned to enter, was in the worst shape of all. No one could say what caused it to collapse in on itself. It looked as if an earthquake had shaken it to its foundation, or a huge unseen boot had come down from the sky and stomped it flat. Whatever it was had left the attic window sitting where the front door once was. Sunlight glinted off aluminum beer cans atop the roof, which now hovered only a few feet off the ground. The walls had bowed outward, planks and plastering littering the overgrown yard. From the rise above, Ricky pointed down at the clapboard ruin.
All right, Johnny.
His attempt at an Indian accent was very bad.
Let us explore the ancient Mayan temple.
Kevin looked from the house in the gully to his brother's excited face. His eyes were more doubtful than ever, but he managed a shaky smile.
Yeah, okay, Haji. Let's take Bandit and see what's down there. Probably nothing, but we need to be really careful anyway, okay?
Ricky clapped Kevin on the shoulder and kept speaking in his Haji voice.
Yes, very good, Johnny. Here we go.
He began making his way down the sloping brown side of the drop-off. Clods of dirt and small rocks came loose and tumbled to the gully floor as the boys half walked, half slid to the bottom. The ground at the foot of the slope was hectic with scraggly weeds. The yard was an ocean of hip-high, bronze-tinted grass, waving in a late afternoon breeze. Small, nameless flying things like living dust motes flitted gracefully above the boys' heads, and soft shadows slunk forward as the day grew long. Ricky and Kevin pushed through the grass and crept toward the house, studying the grounds with curiosity. While he was looking up into the trees beyond the gully, Kevin tripped over something hidden in the grass at his feet.
Crap!
The younger boy turned and looked at the ground.
What's that?
Ricky leaned down and felt for whatever it was his brother had stumbled over. After a moment, he held up a very old, very rusted length of chain. The links were as thick as his fingers. Dangling from the chain was a dented aluminum sign that read, "No trespassing." He examined the sign for a moment and then held it up to show his brother.
Just an old sign. Come on, keep going. We're almost there.
Soon the grass gave way to a pile of smashed paving and gravel, and the wreck of the house loomed before them. It was like a shipwreck resting at the bottom of a trench. Ricky thought about hobos and geezers, crazy old homeless men who crawled into abandoned houses or squatted under playground slides. They wore filthy coats and had ratty beards and would sometimes do stuff to little kids who invaded their hiding places. Sex stuff. And then they usually murdered those kids. He was brave, though, reckless and brave and excited. He wanted to explore the house very badly. He wasn't even sure why he'd felt this need. It was just something that burned through his veins like fire. He picked up a good-sized hunk of concrete and stepped toward the house. With a grunt, he launched it through the attic window, and a moment later hit the floor inside with a crash. When there were no angry running footsteps or howls of rage to answer the thrown rock, Ricky walked up to the crooked window frame and peeked inside.
Hey, anybody in here? Hey, we're the cops. We're coming in.
He was greeted with silence. He turned and gave Kevin a thumbs up. Kevin, looking very dubious, joined him by the window. Ricky smiled and patted him on the arm.
You ready for this, buddy?
Kevin managed an unconvincing smile and lied.
Yep, sure am. All right, then. Here we go.
Ricky reached in and grasped the sides of the old window frame, heedless of the errant nails and bits of glass. He dragged himself upward and disappeared into the dark. A moment later, he leaned out of the window and reached down to help his little brother up. Kevin took Ricky's hands and was dragged over the sill into the musty shadows of the house. The boy stood and looked around the room. Splintered furniture, filthy blankets, and old magazines lay scattered about the room, covered with a thick fall of dust and cobwebs. At the far end was a trap door that led from the attic to the second floor, which now lay toppled into the basement somewhere below. That's where Ricky wanted to go poking around. Kevin pulled the flashlight from his pocket and turned it on. Its beam looked very small and weak.
Ricky, what if there's things down there? You know, bugs, spiders, snakes, that kind of stuff.
Ricky turned to his brother, the flashlight throwing his face into ghoulish relief.
Kev, don't worry. There's nothing in here. We would have scared it out when I threw that rock in and yelled. Don't worry. There's nothing in here but us.
He strode over to the trap door, kicking detritus out of his way.
Be careful, don't fall.
Kevin aimed the beam of the flashlight down the trap door. The collapsed second floor was little more than a narrow crawl space. Ricky climbed down through the hole, debris falling all around him. He dropped, landed on his hands and knees, and the house groaned like an old pirate ship rolling on the tide. Somewhere beneath him, something snapped. Ricky froze, waiting to see if the ground was going to disappear under his feet. When 10 seconds went by without that happening, he began to inch forward along the dark passage. Shafts of sunlight cut through the gloom here and there, from holes in the ceiling and walls. What they revealed mostly was dust, floating in the air like dry, scratchy mist. It got into the back of Ricky's throat, making him hitch and cough. He crawled a few inches and stopped. Kevin was calling from above and behind him.
Ricky, I don't like it up here. It's dark.
Kneeling in powdered plaster and demolished wood, Ricky rolled his eyes and shook his head.
Well, it's really dark down here.
His shout was loud in the tight space and sent little quakes and vibrations down into the walls. It made him a little uneasy, and he tried to call back with less force.
Besides, you've got the flashlight. I know.
Kevin sounded close to tears.
But it's barely doing anything. Are we done exploring yet? For God's sake.
Ricky was close to the end of his patience.
What did I bring him along for? Not yet. If you're not gonna come help me, then shut your goddamn...
Kevin came crashing through the attic door, slamming into the floor behind Ricky. The whole house shook as dust and debris rained down with a gritty patter. Ricky spun around in the tight space, the floorboards groaning in protest.
Kev?
He was scared.
Kev, you okay?
Whooping coughs answered him, followed by a tearful wailing. Ricky's heart began to hammer inside his chest.
Kevin, say something. Are you hurt?
In a panic, the older boy crept hurriedly towards his brother. Kevin sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand.
I'm okay.
He was lying on his back with his knees drawn up to his thin chest. He pushed himself up on his hands, letting his feet smack against the floor. Immediately, there was a sick wooden ripping sound and a hollow crack. The younger boy dipped an inch or two, and his face went slack with terror.
Ricky?
Ricky felt a horrible chill spread through his body.
Oh no,
he thought.
Oh, please no. Oh, shit, no. Kevin, I'm being deadly serious now. Do not move.
Kevin began to whine and tremble. His voice was choked with mountain alarm.
Why? Am I gonna fall?
He started squirming and the cracking in the floor became louder. Ricky tried to calm his voice to keep from scaring his brother.
You're not going to fall, buddy, but you gotta sit still.
Instead of calm, the words came out clipped as if Ricky were angry. Kevin began to cry harder.
I'm sorry. I'm trying not to move. It's okay, buddy. It's okay. It's okay.
Ricky kept repeating the phrase as he scooted forward, hoping the words would swallow up Kevin's hysteria. The wood beneath them creaked and shifted, and there was a loud pop like an air rifle being fired. The brothers both froze, their wide eyes locked.
Ricky?
Before anything more could be said, the floor beneath Kevin gave way with a mighty scream, and the boy disappeared into the darkness below. Ricky slid forward and howled, a mixture of fear and grief exploding inside him.
Kevin, no!
He peered over the lip of the hole despite the way the floor beneath him sagged. A moment later, he heard the clatter of wood hitting somewhere far below. It was oddly muffled, as if the ground below was carpeted. He waited to hear the sickening thud of Kevin's body hitting, but it never came. A moment later, the younger boy's voice, hollow into huge space and full of dismay, came floating up through the gloom.
Ricky?
Ricky's pulse quickened.
Kevin?
He strained to pick out his brother's shape in the shadows. He squinted, and there, about 7 or 8 feet below the hole, were 2 white spots with another sliver of white between them. Kevin's hands and forehead. He had managed to catch on the edge of an old floorboard that hung out above the basement and was now dangling there.
Holy shit, you didn't fall.
Kevin grunted.
Yes, I did. I know, dummy. I mean, you didn't fall all the way.
Immediately, he wished he hadn't called Kevin a dummy.
Are you okay? I'm scared. My arms are hurting, and this board keeps moving. I don't know how long I can hold on.
Ricky sat back and gritted his teeth, trying to think of a way to help his brother. He was sweating heavily and trying not to give in to panic. He wiped his arm across his face, streaking his forehead with grime. His first thought was that he'd have to find a way to get down there and hoist his brother up. This plan seemed fraught with disaster, and he dismissed it almost immediately. He couldn't see the surface he'd be dropping to or how far down it was. There was no way of telling how much floor was available for walking and standing on. What if only a few scattered boards were clinging to a couple of rotted supports? What if Ricky's dropping down caused Kevin's board to move or break? What if the vibration of Ricky's landing jostled Kevin's hands free? It was unbearably risky. Without more light to help appraise the landscape of the lower floor, there was no way he could safely get down to his brother.
Ricky? Ricky?
Kevin's voice was cold with terror.
There's something moving around down here. Down underneath me. In the basement. Don't worry about it, buddy. It's nothing. Probably just a cat or something.
Ricky scooted a few inches back from the hole and began feeling randomly around the floor for anything that might spark an idea. This was a waste of time, he knew, but his brain seemed stuck.
I don't think so. It sounds big.
Kevin let out a desperate sob.
Please hurry. It sounds big and weird. I don't think it's a cat. It sounds like it's getting closer to me. It's not getting closer, Kev. You're up in the air. I think it's coming up the wall.
The little boy began crying helplessly.
Please. Please hurry.
Suddenly, Ricky's hand bumped something heavy. It rolled a few inches away from him. He reached out, and after a moment of groping, his fingers closed over the flashlight. A burst of excitement and triumph bloomed in his chest, and he smiled.
Hold on, buddy. I'm going to check out your situation. I found the flashlight.
Kevin's voice was a shaky whisper.
Okay.
Ricky thumbed the flashlight on. It was surprisingly bright in the cloistered crawlspace. He lay on his stomach and shined the light down the hole where his brother was hanging. His smile vanished instantly. Kevin's head came up and he squinted into the flashlight's beam. Ricky had guessed correctly that his brother was holding on to an old plank of the flooring that jutted out over a massive stone basement. Most of the rest of the first and second floors had crumbled down into the bowels of the house. All that remained were a few splintered floorboards clinging to 4 or 5 crossbeams at either end of the room. They gave the impression of a mouth full of crooked teeth, open wide and hungry. It was immediately clear that Ricky was not going to be able to get down to his brother. The plank Kevin hung from was wobbling like a diving board and could go at any minute. Ricky shined a light around the cavernous basement, looking for anything that might give him an idea. He swung the beam up the back wall, and his eyes suddenly went wide. Something was moving down there. Far up on the wall, something seemed to flinch when the flashlight beam struck it. Ricky shined the light back down. There, again, a very large, dark oval smudge seemed to drop a few inches below the flashlight's glow. A lump formed in Ricky's throat. Whatever that was could certainly not be whatever it appeared to be. Not the thing that Ricky's eyes were trying to convince his brain it was. That's not possible. Sweat dripped from his hairline into his eyes. Not in real life. He moved the light down and the thing moved again. This time to the side, but Ricky tracked it with the flashlight beam. It was too big to be spot-lit entirely by the tiny pinprick of light. It seemed to be the size of a truck tire, but it was hard to tell from that distance in the dark.
It's moving again,
Kevin squealed.
I can't hold on. Hold on, Kevin. Just don't move or talk or anything. I'm figuring this out.
An overwhelming fear settled into Ricky's arms and legs and numbed his brain. He leaned forward and stared down at the floor of the basement. As the flashlight beam played across the nameless debris at the bottom of the chasm, Ricky began to realize that some of what he had thought was plaster dust actually seemed to be thick garlands of dusty cobwebs. He scanned the floor with the light and yelped suddenly at something that had been revealed.
Ah!
In the corner near a pile of flooring was a horribly familiar shape that seemed to be wrapped up in tattered bandages like a mummy.
What is it? Why'd you scream like that?
Kevin sounded breathless.
Nothing, buddy. Don't worry about it.
Tears squeezed from the corners of Ricky's eyes.
What am I gonna do?
What had begun as a pleasant afternoon lark had turned into a horror movie. Kevin called out again.
Can you find some rope or something? I'm starting to slip.
Rope. He didn't know where there was rope, but Ricky did know where there was something similar. He sprung to his feet and reached into the attic door to pull himself up.
Kevin, hold on a little longer. I'm going to get that chain from outside.
Kevin's cry was fierce.
No! Please don't leave me alone in here. I think that thing is a rat.
Ricky didn't think it was a rat. Not a normal one anyway, but kept that thought to himself.
I have to go outside to get that chain. I'll be right back in. Now quit screaming or you're gonna fall down there.
Kevin's voice trembled.
Okay, but hurry up.
Ricky had hauled himself into the attic before his brother said okay. He sprinted across the floor to the window and quickly squirmed out, dropping to the ground. The sun, which had been shining brightly when the boys went into the house, was now hidden behind a screen of long, colorless clouds. The little gully was filled with shadows and the air had cooled. Ricky thought there was probably going to be a thunderstorm before too long. He shot across the yard and into the long grass, kicking his feet, trying to find the chain. Now that he was outside, it felt like time had sped up drastically. Every moment he was sure was the moment that his brother's fingers were slipping off the end of the plank, dropping him into the basement with, well, Ricky didn't want to think about that. His breath was coming fast, and he began whipping grass aside, bent at the waist, trying to find a chain. He found it less than a minute after bursting through the window, but to Ricky it felt closer to 10. He grabbed the chain and began reeling in the rusty links, wrapping them around his forearm. He had no idea how long it was and hadn't even considered that it might not be enough to reach Kevin. It felt like minutes were flying by, spinning out riotously and escaping with all hope of saving his little brother. That's when Ricky heard a sound from within the house. It was very faint but unmistakable. His brother was screaming, and if Ricky could hear it out here, then it meant Kevin was really giving his little lungs a workout. He turned and ran for the house, letting the unwrapped part of the chain trail behind him like a long gray ribbon. When he reached the window, he tossed in the section he had managed to gather up, hearing it clink to the floor as it unwound inside the attic. He leapt up at the sill, nearly banging his head on the topmost part of the frame. As he sailed back into the murky attic, his brother's screams came at him in waves of increasing volume. Ricky rolled on his side and realized that Kevin was screaming words. After a moment, he understood what Kevin was saying, and his blood ran cold.
Get away! Get away! Ricky, hurry up! It's huge! I'm coming, buddy. Hang on!
Ricky snatched up the pile of chain that had settled into dust on the floor beneath the window, laying it over his shoulder, and ran for the attic door. He was a step away from dropping down through the hole in the floor when the length of chain that still hung outside the window caught and jerked him right off his feet. He landed hard on his butt and the air whooshed out of him. The house shivered and creaked. Ricky sat there dazed and shook his head. Down below, Kevin's screaming rose an octave and splintered.
Ricky! Ricky!
Ricky climbed to his feet, a little unsteady but unharmed, and looked back to where the chain had snagged over the windowsill. He ran over and lifted the rusted links and began hauling in the rest. It was the no trespassing sign. It had bounded up on the outside and gotten stuck under a piece of clapboard. Ricky shook it violently, suddenly furious at its audacity, and hissed at it through clenched teeth.
Oh, you piece of shit!
He yanked more chain, pulling it through the gravel at the base of the house, and finally, after a few moments, managed to get the rest of it through the window. All the while, Kevin's impossibly high-pitched shrieks sailed up from the darkness, rattling in Ricky's ears and heart. The older boy, now free of snags, rushed back to the attic door and slid to a sitting position. He was in a hurry, but would not make the mistake of dropping full tilt down the hole. If the floor collapsed, it would mean the end for both of them. He scooted to the edge of the opening and forced himself to climb carefully down. The seconds ticked by, and it felt like a long time before his feet touched wood. Once he was down in the truncated hallway, he tugged the chain in after him. Ricky picked up the flashlight from the floor where he had left it and shined it through the broken floor into the basement. He aimed the light at the back wall where the large moving shape had been, and the wall was bare. He shined the light along the basement floor. No sign of anything moving. His brother continued to scream, and his cries had melted into one long squealing wail.
Kevin!
Ricky shouted down, trying to cut through the caterwauling.
Kev!
Kevin either didn't hear or was too scared to pay attention. Time was fleeting. It already felt like an entire day had passed since the younger boy went through the floor. Ricky couldn't waste another moment. He opened his mouth and shouted as loudly as he could.
Kevin, shut your fucking mouth and listen!
Almost immediately, the screaming dried up to a trickle of tearful whimpering. Ricky very rarely used the F word in front of Kevin because the younger boy always tattled. Hearing it now had shocked him quiet. A lunatic giggle tried to worm its way up Ricky's throat, and he swallowed it down with a grimace. If they got out of this alive, he was going to use the F word every day from here on out. He continued in a much less aggressive tone.
Kevin, can you hear me? Yes.
There was a lot of panic in that quivering word.
Where is it?
Ricky did not need to explain what he meant. A horrible keening sound came from his brother.
Oh, it's up under the floor where I'm at. It's right in front of me. Ricky, it's huge.
His voice was beginning to rise again in volume and pitch.
It's upside down and looking at me. Ricky, God!
He broke into a sob and then somehow managed to get a hold of himself.
It's a few feet away. I've never seen one this big.
Ricky's heart was thudding, and adrenaline shot through his veins like rocket fuel. He lay on his stomach, his arms and head positioned over the hole. He began threading the chain down to Kevin.
Is it moving?
Ricky saw Kevin duck his head below the level of the floorboard and quickly looked back up.
No, it's just looking at me.
Ricky nodded to himself.
All right, look, I'm lowering this chain down to you. When it gets down in front of your face, you're gonna have to let go of the board with one hand and grab onto it. Quick, and hold tight, okay? But I'll fall.
Ricky continued to lower the chain. It was swinging and bumping against the planking now.
You're going to fall if you don't do this. Plus, how long do you think that thing is going to just sit there and watch?
Kevin sounded doubtful but resigned.
Okay, you're right. I know.
Ricky took the pile of chain that was next to him and shoved it under his body, hoping his weight would help keep it from unspooling when Kevin grabbed on. He wasn't entirely sure this would work, but there was no other option.
You see it? Yep. Okay. Want to do the count of 3?
Kevin's voice was choked with fresh tears.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay.
Ricky could feel his heart pounding against the floor.
Here we go. When you grab it, try to stick your fingers through the links to hold on better.
His throat worked and slow tears spilled down his dirty cheeks.
1. I love you, Ricky. I'm sorry.
Ricky sniffed and his chest hitched.
2. I love you too, buddy. Don't worry about it.
He took a deep breath and tightened his grip on the chain. He closed his eyes and said a very quick prayer in his head.
God, please don't let this go wrong.
He took one more deep breath and shouted,
3!
Several things happened at once. Kevin let forth a hoarse shout like some ancient barbarian charging into battle. At nearly the same instant, the chain pulled taut in Ricky's hands and slipped forward alarmingly and began swinging. Kevin's full weight, slight though it was, dragged Ricky and the chain further over the hole in the floor as he let go of the plank. There was a vertiginous moment when Ricky thought Kevin wasn't going to be able to hold on. He could see him down there hanging on with one hand while the other one groped at the jutting floorboard. Then he had both tiny white hands and both legs wrapped around the chain. The strain on Ricky's arms was intense, but it wasn't as bad as he had expected. He felt like a superhero, as if he could pull a full-grown man up to his level. He let out a triumphant laugh.
I got you! Kev, we did it! I got you, man!
A beautiful smile spread across his face. Then Kevin screamed. Something long and black and tapered had snaked around the lip of the floor down there and was pawing at Kevin's legs. Another appeared and another, and yet a fourth, all poking and prodding at the younger boy with fluid yet somehow mechanical movements from beneath the floorboards. Ricky watched helplessly, horrified but fascinated. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Kevin's eyes shined in the gloom, wide and scared.
Pull me up! It's coming, Ricky! It's coming!
The chain began to bounce and swing, making it hard for Ricky to keep the slack beneath his body. He slipped one forearm under the chain and began scooting backward on his stomach. The flaking, rusty links pressed painfully into his skin, making him wince. He gave another mighty heave and was rewarded with a few more inches ratcheting over the lip of the hole. He knew that if he didn't sit up to gain some leverage, he was never going to get his brother out. He focused his strength on his tormented arms and began rising, first to his elbows and then slowly to his knees, till he was on all fours. The pressure from the chain had grown immense, as if there were a 2-ton boulder at the end of it instead of a 50-pound child. As he worked his way to a sitting position, his brother's frightened shrieks continued to reverberate through the ruined house.
It's coming up, Ricky, hurry! Oh God, it's climbing up after me!
Ricky didn't waste any energy trying to respond. He just kept tugging at the chain, straining and sweating, as he finally managed to sit up and plant his rear on the dusty floor. He took 2 or 3 gasping breaths, and then really settled into dragging Kevin up. Now, instead of only a couple of inches at a time, Ricky was able to gain 5 or 6 with every pull. He leaned back against the weight of his brother on the chain and braced himself against the floor with his feet splayed. The muscles in his arms felt like they were going to pop free right off his bones. Despite this, he began to pull faster, knowing that each link that snapped back into the crawl space brought him closer to getting Kevin back. Ricky had tuned out his younger brother's squalling and concentrated all his energy on the physical act of pulling. He had retreated into a silent chamber of focus where all he could hear were his own grunts and the clinking of the chain against wood. With reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed, Ricky began hauling up longer segments, hand over hand. He had found a rhythm and was rocking back and forth, the burning at his elbows and shoulders far from his mind. It was almost anticlimactic when Kevin's hand, waving madly at the end of his skinny wrist, popped up through the hole in the floor, grasping madly for the sides. The younger boy found the floor and grabbed it, helping Ricky in the final massive tug that brought Kevin up from the depths of the house. His top half burst through like a fish breaching the water, and he flopped down into the dust between Ricky's feet, sobbing. With a startling crash, the world and all its cacophonous racket slammed back into Ricky's head, shoving him out of his reverie. He let the chain fall from his raw, bleeding hands and grimaced as his arms began cramping up. He wanted to lay back and close his eyes for a while, but the floor was bending and creaking beneath their combined weight. He knew they needed to get back up to the attic.
Kevin, hey, I got you, man.
Kevin had his face buried in his arms, crying and moaning. He didn't answer.
Kev, come on. You gotta get up so we can get out of here. You want to get out of here, don't you?
When his brother still didn't respond, Ricky's frayed nerves snapped and he hissed with fury.
You get your ass up off that floor. You hear me?
Kevin finally choked back his tears and raised his head. His face was streaked and filthy, his hair matted with sweat. He looked small and frail, like a cat rescued from a well.
I'm sorry. I'm just scared. I'm sorry. Please don't be mad.
Ricky cut off Kevin's apology with a wave of his hand.
Shut up. Don't worry about it. Let's just get out of here before this floor drops us both down there. What about the giant? I said shut up. We're getting out.
Ricky had decided that probably in their panic, he and Kevin had imagined something climbing around on the wall down there. He doubted they had seen anything at all. The silk-enshrouded mummy and the other odd shapes were just old garbage covered in dust. It didn't matter anyway, they were leaving. Ricky helped Kevin carefully to his feet and hefted the smaller boy up through the attic door by his underarms. As Kevin's feet left the ground, the floor beneath them bowed ominously downward.
Hurry up!
Ricky stood on tiptoe, waiting for his brother to finish pulling himself up into the attic. A moment later, Kevin clambered the rest of the way through the door, and Ricky followed, wincing at the pain in his shoulders and arms. Once they were on the much more solid floor of the attic, they both collapsed onto their backs, breathing heavily. Kevin's skinny sides heaved in and out under his rib cage, and Ricky's arms, hands, and legs shook and spasmed. A few seconds passed. Ricky sat up, leaning on his hands, and coughed. He looked over at Kevin, the smaller boy wheezing in the dust, and called out to him.
Hey, you okay over there?
Kevin lifted one arm into the air and gave a thumbs up.
I'm all right. Thanks for saving me.
Ricky sighed.
Yeah, no problem.
He cocked his head and frowned.
Hey, you hear that?
Kevin lifted his head off the floor and listened. After a moment, he nodded.
Yeah, what is that?
Before Ricky had a chance to wager a guess, 4 long, probing legs as thick around as Kevin's shin rose up through the attic doorway, clicking and clattering against the floor. Kevin screamed and was on his feet in an instant, backing away toward the window.
Holy shit!
Ricky's eyes popped wide open as he watched the thing crawl up into the attic only a few feet away from them. There was no denying it now. A massive spider, gray-black and hairy, yanked its flat abdomen up over the edge of the trap door. Its legs spread out around it in a 7-foot span. 2 smaller appendages pawed the air above its head, and Ricky could see its slobbering mouth parts working furiously beneath the constellation of 8 shiny black eyes. It made a strange hissing sound, like air escaping from a basketball, and it bounced lightly on the sharp tips of its feet as it faced the boys. Ricky began backing away, not hurrying but not moving slowly either. He heard Kevin scrambling up onto the windowsill and out of the house behind them and was glad. If anything happened in here, Ricky wouldn't want him to see it. Hopefully he'd be climbing up the rise and out of the gully in a minute or so. The spider scuttled forward a few inches for every couple of steps Ricky took backward. It was surely capable of great speed, but it seemed hesitant. Maybe it's not used to being out of the basement, away from its web. Ricky could feel his pulse in his throat. The spider's questing footsteps reminded him of pencils being tapped against desks, and Ricky absurdly wished that he would survive to return to school in the fall. Suddenly, he felt his lower back collide with the windowsill. There was nowhere else to go. Ricky didn't know whether to turn his back on the huge, palpitating creature and hurry out head first, or try and climb out backwards and drop. If he dropped, he'd risk hitting his head on one of the large chunks of concrete that lay beneath the window. The spider was not pausing in its approach now. It continued towards Ricky with a hypnotizing slowness. It had closed most of the distance and was almost within grabbing distance.
Screw it. I'm going out backward.
He placed his palms against the sill and hoisted himself up and out the window in one fluid movement. There was a nauseating drop, and then he hit the ground. Gravel digging painfully into his back. Almost immediately, the spider was climbing out the window, its drowsing scrabbling replaced with wicked speed. It raced down the front of the collapsed gable, its long legs pistoning wildly. As Ricky dragged himself off the ground, he heard a voice calling out from the field behind him.
Ricky, it's coming!
Kevin was standing in the tall grass watching the scene unfold, mouth agape. Ricky sprinted through the broken terrain of the yard, listening to the typewriter sounds of the spider's legs as it gave chase. He knew that he could never hope to outrun it. He imagined how it would feel to have it sink its enormous fangs into the back of his neck, paralyzing him so that it could spin a gauzy suit of silk for him. Ricky closed his eyes and tried to put a little extra steam in his stride.
Stay away from my brother!
Kevin's voice rang out clear beneath the cloudy sky and echoed around the gully. Ricky opened his eyes in time to see a small piece of concrete leave his brother's hand. It sailed past Ricky and crashed into the ground behind him. It had missed its intended mark, but suddenly the furious scurrying sound stopped. Ricky risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the spider had stopped and risen up on its 4 back legs, its front legs undulating hideously in the air. He stopped and faced it, realizing the ground at his feet was littered with chunks of rock and concrete of all sizes. He picked up a large piece of flagon and whizzed it at the spider. His throw did not miss. It struck the creature hard between its 3rd and 4th legs on the left side. It made an awful squealing sound and scrambled backward towards the house. Ricky picked up another piece of rock and threw it, catching the spider on the top of its head near its crown of eyes. It flattened to the ground for a moment, its legs jerking with confusion. Ricky backed up till he was standing next to Kevin in the field. From this distance, somehow the spider's size was even more impressive. It was as if their father's easy chair had grown legs and started walking around. It looked dizzy and stunned as it reversed across the yard. Kevin whispered beside him,
"I've got 2 more rocks if it looks like it's gonna chase us again."
Ricky nodded, his gaze utterly possessed by the gray-black monstrosity that was even now squeezing itself into a space beneath what used to be the porch. He could see it hunched in there, watching them. Where had it come from, he wondered. How did it get so big? And on the heels of that, was the mummy thing in the basement really a dead person? He found himself remembering the missing dog poster back in the neighborhood. He wondered how many posters this thing was responsible for. As the questions rolled around inside his head, thunder rumbled from somewhere beyond the rise. Ricky felt a drop of rain on his nose. It was going to storm soon.
"Come on, Kevin. We need to get home."
Kevin took Ricky's hand, and the older boy, usually disgusted at such gestures, let his hand be held. They backed away from the ruined house, never taking their eyes off the twitching black shape beneath the porch until they were halfway up the rise. As the brothers climbed out of the gully, it occurred to Ricky to wonder what sort of nightmares might be hiding in the other 2 houses down there. Strangely, he felt a wild urge, far back and deep down where his brain met up with his heart, to go back and explore them. Not today, though. He smiled to himself, putting his arm around Kevin's thin shoulders as the rain began to fall. He looked over his shoulder, taking one last look at the forlorn houses. The giant was nowhere to be seen. Not today, but maybe someday.
I walked into that office and wiped some dirt and sweat off of my head with my arm. The office was as wide as a laundromat, with 1 desk and 2 chairs in front of it. A fat man in glasses with a pencil behind his ear stood up and started clapping his flabby old hands. He was sweating, and his face was all red. I was sweating too, so I didn't pay it no bother. He had long hair pulled back in a ponytail, like a girl, and one of them funny beards. I think people called him Van Dykes. "There he is!" he shouted across that room. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was the first voice I'd heard since, well, I can't remember nothing. Since I'd been there, that's for damn sure. "Well?" the fat man badgered me. "Are you going to close the fucking door and come in? Were you born in a barn?" I looked back outside the office as I gripped on that door handle. There was nothing but black behind me. I sniffed my nose and cracked my own neck. "Jesus Christ, son," he hollered. "We have a lot to get to." I jiggled at the handle a bit and then closed it, as I was told. Where am I? I asked him. "Come on over here and take a seat." He pointed at one of them chairs in front of his desk. "We have a lot to get through before I can send you out." I shuffled my dirty bare feet over toward him. "Send me out where?" I asked him. "Am I going somewhere?" He pointed at the chair on the left in front of his desk. "You've been brought up to the big leagues, son! Didn't anyone brief you?" He picked up his phone and pushed a flashing button. "Phillips!" he howled. "What the fuck is going on?" He waited a second and then rolled them bulgy eyes of his. "Didn't anyone educate number..." He shuffled his hands around the stacks of papers on his desk and pulled out a folder. He opened it and dragged his finger down that page. "Number 25-616232285972351 I got him in the office now, looking at me, and he doesn't know where he is." He covered the phone with his hand. Fucking processing. Heads are gonna roll, that's for sure." He pointed to that left seat again. "Why don't you take a seat while I get your paperwork all situated?" "I'm just fine standing right here," I told him. He waved me away like a bumblebee and took his hand off that phone.
What do you mean he hasn't been processed yet? Did he at least get his orientation? He covered up the phone again and asked, Did you have your orientation yet? I didn't remember getting no orientation, so I said, don't know. He slapped himself on the forehead. Okay, Phillips. He don't know. Ask Thompson what I should do. He pointedly pulled the phone away from his ear and pointed to it. Hold music? Oh, it's just the worst. He rocked back in that chair of his and put his arms behind his fat old head. His armpits were drenched like he just got sprayed with a garden hose. He pulled that phone back to his ear and listened. He let out a big gust of wind and pulled out that pencil from behind his ear. Started writing stuff on that folder. Okay, he said. Okay. Wait. What? He snapped the pencil in half. What do you mean I have to do it? I'm his handler. He should already be prepped and ready to go. God damn it, Phillips! He's supposed to go out today! He started beating that phone against his head. Not hard like. I think he was just making a point. Do you really expect me to believe that the processing department is short-staffed? We're in fucking hell! There are zillions of people down here. He waited a second and listened to Phillips. Oh, don't worry. The IT will hear about this. He put his hand over the phone and looked at me. Can you believe this guy? Then he pulled it right back to that face of his. Fuck me. Fuck you, Phillips! He slammed the phone back onto its butt. He put his hands over his sweaty lady haircut and started laughing like a mental patient. Oh, excuse me, mister. I tried to get his attention. What in the heck am I doing here? He peeked out behind them hands and took a deep breath. Then he opened up that folder. Come on over here and take a seat. He pointed at that left chair. I limped on over. Seemed like I'd been walking forever and my legs hurt. Pulled that chair out from his desk. I haven't sat down in a long time, mister. He picked up some glasses and went back to the folder. It's not like sitting is something you have to learn how to do. He looked up at me. Just jokes, son. Then he looked back down at that there folder again. Yep, looks like you have been walking for a long time. He took them glasses off. How long do you think you've been down there? I brushed off the seat on that chair. Well, I don't know. Seems like forever. He smiled at me. You don't need to tell me, I've been there. Thing is that there is no time in hell. It's just, here. I bent down to take that seat and then fell right onto my ass. That chair wasn't even there at all. He shot out of his seat and shouted, Bam! That never gets old. You trying to hoodwink me, mister? I looked behind me to see who pulled it away before I tried to sit in it. I think no one was there. The chair weren't even there no more. He started screaming and laughing and pounding his fists on the desk. So classic. So classic! I rubbed my legs and my butt, and they sure did hurt. Where'd that chair go? Why the hell would y'all do that to me? He stopped laughing for a second and then looked behind him like I wasn't talking to him at all. Then he turned back to me and looked at me like he didn't know whether to check his watch or scratch his ass. Y'all? He turned around again. I'm the only one here. He took a seat and then went back to that folder. Oh, here we go. He thumped on that folder with his finger. You're from the American South. Duh. I got back to my feet and brushed off the backs of my legs. I guess so. I don't remember much. He snapped his fingers and that chair came right back up behind me like some kind of magic trick. No one remembers much about being up there. He pointed at the white ceiling. Take your seat, please, son. I stepped up toward him. Mister, I got a mind to... Just sit down. I got my laugh for the day. I grabbed the chair by its arms and lowered myself onto the seat. Didn't get swallowed up into thin air this time around. He threw the folder back on the desk. Well, You don't have a name on here other than 225-61623228597235119. I was listening to him best I could, but I was thinking more about how good it felt to sit down. Seemed like I'd really been walking around in them hot old caverns forever. You're the first person I spoke to since I've been here. He looked at me like I was a squirrel in a rat trap and pointed a new pencil at me. I'm gonna call you Country. Started licking at my dry hands with my tongue. Why you want to call me that? He started making fun of the way I talked. Well, you're a little bit country, being a southern gentleman and all. Besides, I don't want to have to read off that long number every time I want to call you something. Well, I think I want to go back to them caverns now, mister, I told him. He put his elbows down on the desk and looked at me straight. No, I don't think you do. My hands were covered in calluses like I got chicken pox from a baseball mitt. I tried to look at him best I could. And, why's that? Jesus! He yelled, and then pushed me some lotion on the corner of his desk. Licking your hands is only going to make them worse. I squirted a little bit of the lotion out of the jar and then smelled it. This ain't hot sauce or nothing, is it? Hot sauce? Ha ha! Hilarious! He grabbed the bottle and dealt a little bit onto his hands and then lathered them up. That is a good idea, though. I need to remember that one. He stood up. You want something to drink, Country? Better not be no hot sauce, I warned him. He walked over to a water cooler in the corner that wasn't there a second before. What exactly is your obsession with hot sauce? He poured out some water into a little cup and brought it back to me. I grabbed the cup and sucked it down. Couldn't even remember the last time that I had water. I handed it back to him. Can I have me a little more? He chuckled. You bet, Country. He walked back to the water cooler and refilled that cup. You know, you're real lucky. In all my time working as a handler down here, I've never seen anyone make it to agent status so quickly. The IT must have seen something special in you. The IT? I asked. Yeah, the IT. Trust me. He moseyed back to me with my second cup of water. I'm just a lowly handler, and I had to suck the IT's dick and eat the IT's pussy for what seemed like forever. You ain't making no sense. I took the cup and licked at the rim like a bullfrog catching a fly before I drank it down. It was the best darn water I ever did have. The IT is what people up there call the devil, he giggled. Satan? Lord of the underworld? Mephistopheles? Let me get this straight, mister. The devil is some kind of lady? Didn't you just hear me say that it had a dick, Country? Keep up. You ever heard of a lady with a dick? I crunched up the paper cup over my head and tried my damnedest to squeeze every darn drop of water out of it. You also said that the IT had a vagina. The IT has both, he started yapping. I don't know what the fuck I was sucking and eating. You don't ask the IT questions. The bottom line is that I did my time and I got this job. Now, as of today, I work for you. Well, I never heard about nothing like that about dicks and vaginas and all. I also never even met this IT thing. I unfolded the cup and put it down on his desk. I wanted more water, but I didn't want to seem like I was giving him no disrespect. What are we going to be doing? Shoveling pig shit or something? He sat down behind his desk and started giggling. Oh no, Country. Oh, we won't be shoveling pig shit. He pulled open a drawer behind that desk of his and then dropped a bunch of books and folders in front of me. As of today, you are an agent. You will be sent out into the field to manipulate the forces of heaven. Your purpose, well, our purpose, is to break down the followers of God, one at a time. Do what now? I picked up one of them books and flipped through the pages. He smirked and put out his hand to shake mine. Name's Sonny Hooper. You can call me Hoop. I will be your coach and your handler. I looked up from that book, licked my hand, and shook his. "You do know how to read, don't you?" he asked me. "I assume you slept well?" Mr. Hooper asked me. He walked over and handed me a big old bottle of water. I pulled some crust off the inside of my nose and sucked that water down. It refilled by itself. Well, I'll be. I figured it was some kind of magic or something. It sure was nice to sleep in a bed, but that fan wasn't really working real well. "Country!" He dug them flabby hands of his into a bag of potato chips. "You're in hell! Do you know how hard it is to get fans down here at all?" He waved me over to a new door that appeared behind his desk, over by that water cooler. I followed him. I remember one summer, all them hardware stores in my town were out of fans. That must have been like hell! It said in your file that you're from Tupelo, Mississippi? The home of the king? Like you just turned on a light bulb in a closet, I remembered the king. I remembered Elvis. I liked music. He put out his hand and let me enter that new room before him. I looked inside. It was all white with some kind of computer doohickey and some other type of trough that looked to be hooked up to the computer doohickey. There ain't no tricks in here, is there? Like with that chair? He put up his arms and the flab jiggled in his short-sleeved shirt. "We don't have time for tricks, country." I walked into that room. He pointed to the computer doohickey. "That is the machine that will take you back to the Earth realm." I scuffled over to the trough and bent down to smell it. It wasn't a trough like the tin ones I used to fill on my daddy's farm. At least, I didn't think so. "I'm getting out?" I looked at them hands of mine. "I get to leave?" He put his hand over his face. "Oh God, no! You just get to go on a vacation." He walked over to that computer doohickey and pushed a couple of buttons on a typewriter that lit up like a light bright toy. "Did you read any of the books or assignments that I gave you yesterday?" I walked over to him and looked at the window glass TV screen on top of that computer doohickey. It was too dark to read. I touched that window screen. He swatted my hand away like I was a fly on a hot dog. "Don't touch that, country!" "Are you telling me that you don't know how this works?" I was getting a little tired of his tone. I said it was dark. He smacked himself on the head. "Fuck! That's right. You can't read!" "I can read!" I yelled at him. I think. "Look, it's not that hard. I have sent several agents into the field without understanding the ins and outs of the equipment." He handed me a little June bug-looking thing. "Put this over your ear." I turned that critter over and hundreds of thousands of legs jiggled round. I didn't much like that bug. "It's not going to bite me, is it?" "Bite you? No! It's an earpiece, so I can communicate with you." He pointed out a microphone coming out of that light bright typewriter in front of the computer doohickey. "I talk into that, and you hear me in your ear. I will be watching you from this." He pointed at the window glass TV. "That way, I can monitor what you are doing. We can't have you breaking any of the treaty agreements with the guys upstairs." He pointed to that ceiling. I put the bug in my ear. It clamped over the top and the bottom. I felt all thousands of them legs prick into my skin. "You mean God?" "God, Jesus, angels, and shit. The other team. Let me make this simple." He pointed to that white trough. "You will be in here." Then he walked over to that computer doohickey. "I will be watching you from here. You will be doing what I say and playing for our team. It's like football." I like football, I think. I scratched at my ear. The June bug was locked on there pretty tight. It was making me want to sneeze for some reason. "What position am I playing?" "It's not literally football. You will be taking over the body of a little girl who is presumed possessed. The device in your ear will control your crossing between the realms. He tapped on that June bug thing. I looked at the window glass TV on top of that computer doohickey. It was seeing everything that I was seeing. I waved my hand in front of my face. Huh. This machine, he waved his hand around the room, it's connected to Hell's core. It allows us to communicate with the Earth realm through little girls. I didn't much understand what he was saying, so I just acted like I did and nodded my head. Well, little girls, they are the easiest to occupy. For some reason, everyone thinks that when a little girl is sad or starting her period that she is possessed. So, we breach their consciousness when they are easily inhabitable. I could tell you a million stories of all the times that the other team has tried to shut down our operation because we figured that out. That's why there is a treaty in place. We can scare the hell out of anyone we want, but we can't kill anyone from their team. It's become a game of influence. We used to be able to take down whoever we wanted, but the IT has kind of a weird relationship with the other team. Remember that. Our job is to outwit them and show the rest of the Earth realm the persuasion of the IT. I looked at Mr. Hooper and then at the TV screen. Remember what? Jesus country! He put one of them hands of his on the microphone and pushed a couple buttons on that light bright typewriter. Phillips! He turned around to look at me and said, "Just a second." He turned back to that computer doohickey. I saw the back of his head in that glass window TV. This guy isn't ready. He put his hand over that June bug in his ear. I know that we're short-staffed, asshole. I think we should send him back to the caverns. He doesn't even want to do this. I walked over and tapped him on the shoulder. Mr. Hooper. Hoop! Call me Hoop. He shushed me like we was in church. Not you, Phillips. I know you know my name. He's talking to me. The June bug in my ear started to itch some more. Hooper, I don't want to go back to them caverns. What do I gotta do? He put up his finger again. Wait, Phillips. It looks like he doesn't want to go back to the caverns. I shook my head and talked into my June bug. I don't want to go back to them caverns, Mr. Phillips. You heard it from him. Can we send him up to show you that he's ready? Yes. Okay, of course. I'll get him to sign the paperwork. Mr. Hooper stuck up his thumb. I think we're in business. He walked over to the trough and flipped some doodad. Oh, fuck you, Phillips. He smirked and winked at me. You have a better chance of going back to the caverns than my boy Country. He waited a second. Oh, yeah. You want to make a wager? You're on. He waited another second. Tool shed? Are you fucking kidding me? She's in a fucking tool shed? This hick will be a rock star in a tool shed. If Country fucks this up, I'll do 1,000 years in the caverns. If he does things right, you go back to the caverns. Later, dipshit. He put his hand over his June bug like he was hanging up a telephone. Do I gotta go back? I took another drink from the water. Sure did taste good. Mr. Hooper grabbed a stack of papers that was sitting next to the computer doohickey. He handed it to me. You have to sign this now. I looked at the pages but couldn't read nothing. Well, what does it say? That's right. You can't read. He grabbed them papers back. I can read. I think. He pointed to the first page. This says that you are enlisted in the service of the underworld and that you pledge yourself to the IT. He went to the next page. This says that you will abide by the rules of the treaty, blah, blah, blah. Remember, don't kill any priests, parents, good Christians, people, etc. We don't kill. Our mission is to influence. He flipped through more of them pages. This is the treaty. He flipped through what seemed like a couple of 100 pages and finally he got to that final page. This says that you are choosing not to walk the caverns anymore. And finally, this says that you won't try to escape once you're in the Earth realm. Escape? Yeah, man. If you rip this off, he rubbed on the June bug in my ear. When you're in the Earth Realm, you're trapped there. I took a sip of that water. So, I'd be free. No, you're not going there yourself. Only your soul. Your brain's going there too. You will be trapped in the body of one of your hosts. Sure, you'll feel all the same pain that your host feels, and you'll be able to smell the air and taste the food and all that good shit. But you won't be there. Imagine being in a jail where you can't talk to anyone you see. That sure does sound better than them caverns, I told him. Of course it does. He flicked his fat old finger on that page. Once you sign this, you'll never see the caverns again. I promise. You will be able to drink all the water you want. You will have a bed and a room every night. If you help me win this bet, shit, I'll get you a working fan and some lights in your room. He handed me back them papers and a pen. Please help me out, country. In case you didn't hear, I just made a bet with that pederast Phillips. Man, do I hate that guy. He's been trying to steal my job for years. I looked at them papers and grabbed that pen. So, my brain won't hear anymore? He turned back to the computer doohickey. No, your little brain won't be in hell anymore. I don't much like the way you're talking to me again, Mr. Hooper. Fine, he said as he punched away on that light, bright typewriter. Big brain, you have a fucking big brain. I started to sign in papers and then stopped. Wait, what's my name? He didn't turn around. Just sign the contract, country. If you can't spell, then just put an X. I'll send it over to Phillips immediately, and he'll process 225-61623228597233519. I'll scratch an X on that last page. Mr. Hooper snatched them papers back from me and fed them into his computer doohickey. This should do the trick. Thing is that you need to follow the rules when you're up there, because we're sending you out as an unprocessed agent. We are taking a chance on you, because I believe in you. He waited a minute. I took a gulp of water. Did you get the contract, Phillips? He snapped his fingers at me and pointed toward the trough. Then, he whispered to me, "Get in." I walked over to that trough. It opened up like a garage door and I looked inside. There was all types of machines and wires inside of it, but there was also a comfortable-looking lawn chair in the middle. I pushed my hands up against the back. Sure was soft. Oh, fuck off, Phillips! Mr. Hooper screamed like an alley cat. Be sure and tell the old gang down in the caverns I fucking hate them. He tapped on his June bug again and then hit a few more times on that light bright typewriter. I dragged my legs over the side of the trough and laid back in the chair. Is this right? Perfect, country, now lay back. He walked up behind me and put this thingy that looked like a green bean strainer over my head. It's going to be a bit disorienting when you slip back to the Earth realm, but it will get easier the more you do it. He flipped on a switch on the side of that green bean strainer. Are you my boy? I ain't nobody's boy, I told him. He laughed and his fat rolls jiggled near my nose. I know that. You're a badass. You're a soldier. You're a hero. He slapped me on my arm. Tell me the rules now. I stretched out my neck. That chair sure was comfortable. I felt like a pig in shit. Sure, it was better than walking around them caverns. Number 1, don't tear off this or my brain will be inside a little girl forever. I tapped on that June bug. He started wheezing away. Perfect. What else? Don't kill no priests or nothing like that. Don't kill anyone, country. Remember the treaty. You have to remember the treaty. If you fuck this up, the IT will get in trouble with God, and then I will be sucking dicks and eating pussies for a long time. Don't kill nobody, I said. Red light started swirling round on top of that window glass TV, and a bunch of gravy started filling up inside the trough. Mr. Hooper counted down with them fingers of his. 3, 2, 1. Good luck, country. Let's send Phillips back to the caverns where he belongs. Goddamn Yankee. I think he lived in Boston when he was on Earth. I don't think I ever been to no Boston, but I don't think I'd like it. The top of that trough locked tight like a cigarette holder, and the gravy completely filled it up. Didn't smother me though, and it didn't taste like no gravy I ever had before. I opened my eyes and spit out that gravy taste, but nothing came out. The vacation ride made my big old brain feel drunker than Cooter Brown, whoever the hell that was. I looked around to see where I was. I was in a tool shed, hidden back in a corner behind a lawnmower. I scratched at it to see if it was real and got my hand all tangled up in some spider webs. Yep, it was real all right. I put my hand up my dress. There weren't no man parts down there. I was inside of one of them little girls. I didn't want to go up in there too far. Didn't much like messing around with little girls, I reckon. The door across the shed opened, and I think I heard a bird chirping. Little old mouse scurried into another corner. "Violet, are you in here?" the man hollered into the shed. "It's just Deacon Brashears, Deacon Prine, and your pa." I peeked up over the side of the mower. The barn doors into the shed opened about halfway. I was back. I was back on Earth. I heard a voice in that June bug on my ear. "Country, can you hear me?" I looked out and saw them deacons enter the shed. "Country, it's Hoop. Can you hear me?" I pressed on the June bug like Mr. Hooper said. "I hear you," I said. At least I think I said. My voice sounded like a little girl. This is weird. "Don't worry, the machine in your ear is cloaked when you're in the Earth realm. You successfully crossed the plains. What do you see?" The deacon started to enter the shed. "Violet, it's your pa. We're here to help you." I pressed on that June bug again and whispered like a cotton-tailed rabbit. "I'm in the shed. Some men are coming in here. I think they want to help me? What should I do?" Mr. Hooper laughed. "Flick the switch on the side of the receiver on your ear. I need to see what's happening. I need to handle the situation. Remember, no fuck-ups or I'm in the caverns for a long-ass time." I turned on a little switch on the side of that June bug like Mr. Hooper told me. I felt a breeze come from outside through a hole in the shed. It smelled nice, like the magnolias were blooming on a spring day. It smelled better than that burnt pig shit in them caverns. It smelled like home. It made me remember home. I even think I heard a bird chirping outside. "Good work. I can see the door and the men. Keep looking in that direction. I need to know what we're dealing with. Remember, no killing." I did as Mr. Hooper told me. 3 shadows entered the shed. I grabbed onto the seat of the mower. "Oh shit. What, Mr. Hooper, what do you see?" I asked him. "Open your eyes. Code Red country, they have bats and a shotgun." He was right. As soon as them deacons and that paw got to the middle of the shed, one of them clicked on a light bulb with a string. 2 was all choking up on different bats, and the man who wasn't in a church outfit had a shotgun. I think that one was Pa. "Why do they have bats and guns, Mr. Hooper?" I asked him, getting a little chilly from the hole in the shed. "Jesus, country. They know that you're inside the little girl. Fucking Phillips blew our cover. We should abort." "Abort? You should come back. They've already won. Looks like it's back to the caverns for me. Damn it. I ain't going back to no caverns," I yelped out. "Violet," one of them men asked, "we're here to help you. Come on out of that corner." "Abort, country. Abort!" I stood up and brushed off that spring dress that little girl had on. I tapped on the June bug. "I ain't going back to them caverns." Violet, baby? It's Pa. What caverns, honey? One of them men said to me. I looked over next to me and grabbed a digging spade. Y'all better not come back here. I'll fucking kill you motherfuckers. I'll rip them dicks of yours and eat them like a possum pie. They all gasped as if they'd never heard a swear before. Country, god damn it, stand down! Fuck you, Mr. Hooper. I'm gonna win this football game, I told him. You ain't gotta worry about sucking no more dicks or eating no more vaginas. I jumped on top of that lawnmower seat and pulled that spade back behind my right ear. Little girl's hair fell in front of my face. Get out of here, you fucking Yankees! Go back to heaven! Daniel, go back in the house. You don't need to see this. The Pa stood there, crying like a woman. His shotgun fell onto the dirt floor. One of them deacons stepped to me. Violet, put down that shovel. The June bug started blaring static and buzzing in my ear, but I couldn't really hear nothing Mr. Hooper was saying to me. I turned off that switch that he had me turn on. I'm gonna kill you fuckers. I jumped at the deacon in front and shoved the spade right around his dick. He dropped to his knees and started begging me to stop. I shoved that thing in and out his gullet like I was churning butter. A lot of his insides dumped onto the ground in front of him. He fell on his knees like he was starting to pray. He weren't praying though. He was trying to pick up his gizzards and all and put it back inside of him. I started stomping through all them guts like I was jumping through sprinklers in the mud. I picked up a long string of him insides and wrapped it around his neck like I was putting Christmas lights on a tree. He coughed and screamed and it smelled kind of like he might have shit in his drawers. He started losing his breath and finally fell forward. I lifted up that spade and dug it clean through him from the other side. When he hit the ground flat and stopped flipping and flopping, I just dug my little girl hands into them ears of his and pulled his head off. That second deacon came at me with his bat and swung away, barely missing my head. Stupid Yankee. I walked on top of that one who was dead and shoved my little girl fingers into his eyes. You don't fuck with my team! I ripped around in his sockets and scratched his face, tearing all the skin right off. Water pouring out of his eyes tickled on my fingers and made me smile. I wasn't in no cavern no more. Pa folded like a coward at a card table in the corner, squealing like a little baby hog. All he could say was, "No, Violet, please stop." The second deacon came with me again. He didn't really have much of a face no more. "Lord, give me power!" he cried. I jumped off of the deacon whose head I ripped off on the floor of the shed. That one without a face was humming songs about God and looking at me like he wanted to kill. I ran back over to the mower and I climbed up on the workbench. I snatched up 2 hammers that were sitting next to my dirty little girl feet. The deacon charged at me. "Satan, leave this innocent child!" he growled. I growled at him, and he swung that bat of his and missed me again because I jumped like a bullfrog. It was about then that it became clear that I had some type of superhero powers. I threw myself at him and grabbed onto that neck of his, dragging him down to the dirt floor. "Please, God, give me the power to fight the evils of..." He didn't say another word on account of me smashing his mouth with the front of one of them hammers. I started laughing again as them teeth of his started jumping round like popcorn on a hot stove. I got up and danced around him doing the do-si-do while he tried to grab that bat of his again. I took that other hammer and started using the claw side to hack away at his throat. He was choking and it sounded kind of like he was gurgling with baking soda. I smacked that hammer into the bottom of that chin of his and then danced back round behind his head and ripped that jaw of his clean off his head. I heard Pa still crying. If he knew what was good for him, he'd just count the seconds of life that he had left and enjoy the show. I was done with the second deacon. I dug both of them hammers into both sides of his forehead. I wasn't counting, but I must have smashed into that skull of his 10 times. He tried to shake his head, but he just dragged them claws further and further into his skull. He picked up his jaw and his teeth and junk, and then he tried his darndest to speak. I grabbed onto that tongue of his that was dangling like a dick on sex night, stepped on what was left of his throat, pulled it right out. I threw it over at Pa, letting him know that he was next. More static came through on the June bug.
Country, goddammit, abort! Do not engage! Turn your camera back on!
I ain't going back to them caverns, Mr. Hooper. That second Yankee deacon started to sputter out like a truck ran out of gas, so I stood up over him and started running piss out of my new girl parts all over that chest of his. Fuck you, deacon. There ain't no God to help you now. You go and tell that to Mr. Phillips. I never did like no cheaters. He weren't talking no more, so instead of going on about the devil and whatnot, I pulled them hammers out of his head. The second hammer was buried pretty deep, but I jimmied it loose. I looked Pa straight in the face as I smashed both claws down next between them eyes of his. With all my little girl's superhero power might, I cracked that head of his open like the Grand Canyon. His eyes busted out of them sockets and landed next to that pile of teeth and that jaw of his. The hammers flew out of my hands to both sides of that shed, and it dug my face into the bowl I made out of his head. I had tasted varmint brain before, but I never did try human brain until that day. Hadn't eaten nothing all those years in the caverns, and it weren't as good as I remember steak being, but it were delicious on that day.
Country, what the fuck is going on up there? I can't lock your location. I need to bring you back now. You don't want to be trapped up there.
I sniffed around like a coon hound to let Pa know that I was hunting. He was curled up in the corner with that shotgun his across his lap. "Why are you crying, Pa?" I asked him, and wiped some of them brains off my face. All sorts of goo and muck dripped down the front of that dress of mine. The head of that first deacon was between us. I picked it up by the hair and rolled it like a bowling ball over to Pa.
"Please, Violet,"
he whimpered, and tried to hide behind them hands of his.
"Please, Lord, please. Save my Violet."
More static came through that June bug, but I couldn't hear no more Mr. Hooper. I stubbed my toe into one of them circular saw tables on my way to go play with Pa, and a blade fell near a little girl foot of mine. Pa put his hands together like he was praying.
Please, God, please dispel this demon from my sweet Violet."
I bent over in that little girl dress and picked up that saw blade. One of them edges cut into my finger. I licked my little girl blood and spit it at Pa. He was still crying. It made me laugh.
"Country, turn your camera back on."
Before I knew it, I was standing over Pa. He stopped praying and looked up at me.
"Violet, it's Pa. Please come back to me."
I raised up that saw blade and buried it into that spot between the little girl's devil finger and ring finger. Mr. Hooper was right. It felt worse than getting that hand of hers stuck in a wood chipper. I pressed it down as far as it would go, cracking and breaking bones in that top of that little girl hand. Then, when I finally buried it all the way down to my little wrist, I bent them little legs and started shitting on Pa's coveralls. Pa stopped crying and I grabbed his hand. "Tell that Yankee Phillips that the South will rise again." I pulled Pa's arm out, and right as he started shrieking, I used my new saw hand to chop off that arm of his. I kept shitting as I stood on top of him. He laid down, taking in his own dirty defeat. Then, I just beat his face in with his own arm. That wasn't killing him, so I took to the saw hand. I just started pulling him apart like a dog with a rag doll. Arms, then legs, then dick, then balls. He was choking on vomit and blood and whatever else, so I helped him out and shoved his fingers from the dead arm into his mouth. Still laughing and shitting, I kinda just started cutting holes in his face. After I got tired of that, I totally sawed his head right down the dead center. There was blood going everywhere in the shed like someone had shot a BB gun into the side of a swimming pool. I dug into his brain and ate away. My second non-vermin brain was better than the first one. Tasted every bit as good as a squirrel, I think. More static came through on that June bug. I've got you. You're coming back, country, you stupid fucking redneck. I opened my real eyes and the white trough started draining water like a bathtub. The cigarette case lid opened up just like it closed. Mr. Hooper ran over and smacked the side of the trough. What in the fuck did you do? I shook the vacation sweating out of my head and grabbed onto the side of that trough. Maybe I'm a little bit more rock and roll than you was thinking. He threw them hands of his up and down like he was waving down a fire in the barn. What the fuck does that mean? I pulled my body up from the lawn chair and threw my leg over the side of the trough. Well, you said that I was a little bit country, and I said I was a little bit rock and roll. Is that a joke? Is that a fucking joke? He cursed. How do you even fucking remember that? I don't know, I told him. I was just playing the sport like you told me to. He stomped over to that light bright typewriter and punched a few of them keys. Jesus, country, I told you not to kill anyone. What in the fuck was that? Are you so fucking stupid that you took the sports reference literally? He tapped on that June bug in his ear. He waited a bit. He pushed some more buttons, then he looked back at me. You killed 2 of God's servants. An innocent man. The girl is dead for sure. You shoved a fucking saw blade straight through her hand, down to her wrist. It's too late to send in a cleanup crew. That tool shed is swarming with angels. They was trying to get me, I told him. He threw a big bunch of papers across the room at me. You know that this means I have to go back down to the caverns, right? Looks like it's 1,000 years of me sucking the IT's dick and pussy again. Fuck. I didn't mean to get you in no trouble. His face went wide like he just saw General Lee's ghost. He lifted that fat old finger of his and put it to his lips. He wanted me to shut up. I grabbed at the water bottle. It was full again. He tapped at the June bug on his ear. Hello, Phillips. I wasn't up there for very long, but I knew that breeze sure felt good. I tickled that June bug in my ear on the belly. The arms pumped in and out like a water pump at a well. Maybe that June bug didn't have to stay on my ear after all. Mr. Hooper fell back in that seat of his and laid back on it like it was a rocking chair on a porch. His belly stuck out and popped one of them buttons on that shirt of his. He didn't even know. Yes, Phillips, I'm quite aware of what happened. He let out a big gasp and listened to his June bug. I drank some more water. Yes, Phillips, I get it. Well, it was your job to process him. I'm just supposed to handle him. I flipped on that switch on the side of my June bug and looked at Mr. Hooper, and then at the glass TV on top of that desk of his. It was a TV camera, I reckoned. Of course, I know that I am the one who took the bet. He started yammering on again. I know he wasn't ready, you scumbag. You took advantage of me, Phillips. Phillips? Phillips? And then I saw him tickle the belly on that June bug in his ear and flip the switch up and down 3 times. The bug's legs came off from round his ear and he threw it across the room. I was right. It did come off. I started walking over to where he threw it to get it from him. When I started bending over, he started screaming. You fucking idiot! Don't bother with that! I won't need that where I'm going. When I touched his June bug, it crawled away, so I didn't bother with it no more. Where are you going? Don't we have more games to play? Unfortunately for me, I'm going back to the caverns for Lord only knows how long. He started crying. Phillips is going to be your new handler. Mr. Hooper, I didn't mean no harm, I told him. I was just doing what felt right.
He walked over to me and put his hand on my shoulder. I get it, Country. You didn't know. It was my mistake. I should never have explained the job to you the way I did. More so, I should never have sent you on a mission without any training. Then, out of nowhere, a bunch of red sirens started flashing all around the room. They weren't there before, I don't think. What the hell now? Mr. Hooper yelled as he wiped all them tears off his fat face. He started running after the June bug, but it was too fast for him. Help me, Country! I need to get this! I ran over by him and chased the June bug across the floor, up and down the walls, until we finally cornered it by the trough. Don't break it, Country, I need it! I put my hands down and cupped them together. The June bug, with all his hundreds of legs, crawled right into my fingers like a cradle. I slowly got up and put out my hands. I suppose it was the least I could do for poor old Mr. Hooper. He plucked that little fella up by a few of its legs and put it over his ear. He tapped on the side. Phillips, what now? Code Red 559er? Not possible. He walked back to that light bright typewriter and pushed a few buttons. Some stuff happened on that window glass TV. Not gonna happen, Phillips. He turned a dial on the side of the desk. I understand that we're short-staffed. He just killed 4 people. There is no way I'm going to send him up again. He put those hands of his and pushed them downward. I'll ask him. I took a drink of that water bottle. What's all these lights mean, Mr. Hooper? He tapped the June bug. We have a situation. A big situation. A Code Red 559er to be exact. I don't know what all that means, I confessed. It means that God and his team, I mean associates, are about to take down one of our most precious hosts. They are apparently angry about what happened earlier. You mean with me? Yes, Country. With you. Well, I asked him, what can we do? Phillips wants to send you back into this host to fight off God's associates. I told him I'd ask you. I tickled that June bug on my ear. It was my chance. If Mr. Hooper was going back to the caverns, and so was I sure didn't have a whole lot of interest in sucking no IT's dick. I'll do it. I swear I won't kill nobody this time. He let out a giant gasp of air. Maybe we don't have to go back to the caverns. Get in the pod and prepare for transfer. He meant the trough. I did as I was told. He tapped on his June bug. Phillips, we'll do it. You have to promise me, though, that if we do succeed in protecting the asset, that you will stand up for me. Mr. Hooper snapped his finger at the trough and then started tapping away at the light bright typewriter. Get in, he told me. Thank you, Phillips, he said. I know we haven't fixed the situation yet, but thank you. He tapped on his June bug and walked over next to me. They are going to let us do it, Country. Sweet Jesus. Sweet Jesus, I said too. He bent down about the same time that lawn chair started dropping into that trough. The gravy started coming up around me again. What are the rules, Country? Please listen to me this time. No killing no one. And? He tapped on my June bug. And don't take this off or turn her off. He put up his hand like he was saluting me. Thank you for serving the IT, soldier. I saluted him back. Figured it was the right thing to do. The cigarette case lid started to fold over me and the gravy filled up the trough. There was no way that I was going back to them caverns ever again. I opened my eyes. I was in bed. I reached down between my legs like I had before. There was no man parts there, but there sure was blood all over that little girl's legs. I looked at my fingers. They were little girl fingers. There was a song playing on a record player in the room. I recognized it. That song was called A Little Bit Country, A Little Bit Rock and Roll. I always liked that song. I think that was my favorite song. Dirty old fan was blowing cold air at me from a nightstand. I heard crickets chirping outside the window. I tapped on the June bug. Mr. Hooper, can you hear me? Yes, now turn on the camera. I got up out of that bed and looked out the window. I saw a nice farm outside and a rusty old swing set. I knew that swing set. Was it mine? I took a sip of a glass of water next to that fan. 2 hound dogs ran by chasing a squirrel. All them years in the cavern made me forget how much I loved being alive. I wanted to be alive again. I don't think that I'm going to turn on that camera, Mr. Hooper, I whispered. What are you talking about, country? Turn on the camera. We have to protect the asset. We had a deal. I started rubbing on the June bug just like Mr. Hooper had before. No, we didn't have no deal. You had a deal with Mr. Phillips and that IT. God damn you, country. You can't do this to me. You signed a contract. That's where you're wrong. I never signed nothing and nothing has been processed. You said it yourself. I clicked the switch on the June bug up and down 3 times and it started coming loose from my ear. I want to be alive again, Mr. Hooper. I don't ever want to go back to them caverns. Don't do this, country. You can't do this to me. The June bug jumped off of my ear onto the floor and I didn't hear nothing in my ear no more. I were a free man. Free to be back on the earth, listening to my favorite song and feeling the breeze from a hot summer night. I got out of the bed and started stomping away at the June bug with my bare foot to the beat of that song by Donnie and Marie that I remembered loving so much. It clicked and fizzed and sparked. Finally, it was all out of juice. I walked across my new room and picked up a little rag doll. I took it back to bed with me. It wasn't as good as feeling a woman next to me in bed, but it was better than hell. It was better than them caverns. And it was better than taking orders from fat old Mr. Hooper. Just before I started to fall asleep in my new life, my great new life, the door to the bedroom creaked open a little bit, and light shined in from the hall. A man came into the room and made his way over to that new bed next to me. He sat down. It was me. Recognize yourself, Deacon Fuchs? I started blinking and huffing. I tried talking back to Mr. Hooper's voice in my head, but no words were coming out of that little girl's mouth. How can you talk to me? I asked in my mind. Oh, come on, Johnny. Do you really think that hell is in the business of giving people promotions and sending them to Earth for vacations? Ha! I don't understand, sir. Please bring me back now. I kept yelling, but nothing was coming out. The man, me, started running his wet hands through that little girl's hair of mine with one of his bare hands, and then he started rubbing up inside my bloody girl parts. There is no back. There are no agents. There are no handlers. There is no Phillips. Our job is to punish people for their sins. It is hell, after all. Then, it all came back to me as quick as Mama Bird bringing food back to her nest. I was Deacon Johnny Fuchs. I had my way with the little girls in my flock. I raped them. I beat them. I told them that I could rid their bodies of the devil's evil. The little girl I was in, I killed her. Her mom and pa told me that she had the devil in her on account of she was bleeding out of her body and carrying on. I buried her little body under that swing set outside of that window. I can't really say it was a pleasure getting to know you. And then, just as my head went quiet again, the other me pushed my little girl head into that pillow on that bed. The little girl tried to scream. I tried to scream. Nobody heard nothing. The belt unbuckled for the first time in what would be a zillion more. Forever. I felt my own penis go inside that little girl as those wet, bloody hands wrapped around that little girl's throat. Welcome to your eternity, Deacon Fuchs.
Chilling tales for dark nights.